Chapter 1621. Shinjioli pursed his lips and poured his divine power into the black iron sword in his hand. It emitted a dim light and formed a black iron shield around Shinjioli's body. The Sky Splitter sword struck a few times but was rebounded by the shield. If the Sky Splitter sword was in the hands of the Demon Lord, then there was no barrier that could not be broken. But the person using it now was Yi Tianli. Yi Tianli's divine power and the Sky Splitter sword's divine power were somewhat incompatible, so the Sky Splitter sword could not unleash its full power in his hands. Even so, when the Sky Splitter sword struck the black iron sword, there were dents on the black iron sword and some parts even cracked. In less than a cup of tea's time, the black iron sword was already badly damaged. Fortunately, Shinjioli's divine power was amazing. During the fight, he would repair the cracks on the black iron sword, so the sword would not be destroyed in an instant. Yi Tianli secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Although he mainly relied on the power of the treasured sword and had an unfair advantage, he still had the upper hand. As long as he had the upper hand, he would have the hope of marrying Mo. He actually felt that it was a little strange. Since the start of the fight, Shinjioli had been defending and did not attack at all. He did not even counterattack the Sky Splitter sword. The people below the stage also noticed this and could not help but look at each other. They did not understand why Shinjioli would do this. There was no lack of top experts in the audience, but after watching for a while, these experts understood that if they were to go against the Sky Splitter sword, even if they had a divine weapon in hand, they would not have any hope of winning. The most taboo in a fight between experts was to be restrained and not give in at all. Now Shinjioli obviously had a lot of scruples. The broken sword in his hand was actually afraid of hurting the Sky Splitter sword and did not stab at it. Occasionally when the two swords clashed, he would deliberately slant his sword to prevent the sword from colliding with the Sky Splitter sword. Shinjioli obviously had some scruples about the Sky Splitter sword. He was at a disadvantage, but he could not bear to hurt the sword. Then to this Demon Lord, everyone couldn't help but turn to look at Mo. Mo sat there expressionlessly, holding her chin as she watched the fight in the sky. Her expression was very calm, so calm that no one could see any fluctuations in her heart. She was just a spectator. The two people who were fighting had nothing to do with her. At first, everyone thought that she would not help anyone. But now, it seemed that she still had some feelings for Yi Tianli and was still willing to marry him. As for Shinjioli, she should be repulsed, right? She didn't want him to win. Everyone faintly felt that there was something wrong between the Devil Lord and Shinjioli. There seemed to be a lot of secrets to be uncovered, but no one could dig them out at the moment. They could only wait and see. As for the Celestial Arch, his expression changed the moment the Heavenly Tao sword automatically returned to Shinjioli. However, he was a profound figure who didn't express his emotions with words. Even the subjects of the immortal dimension around him couldn't figure out exactly what he was thinking at this moment. He was also watching the battle in the sky. He watched as Shinjioli was forced to retreat by the Sky Splitter sword. He watched as he gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. Yi Tianli's eyes showed excitement. It was finally time for him to vent his anger. This person made a fool of him just now. He definitely couldn't let him off. At this time, taking the opportunity to kill him with his sword was also a good idea. That way, he could eliminate all future troubles. Chapter 1622. Moreover, if he used this sword to kill his opponent, the people below could not say anything. After all, this sword had its own will. He could just say that he could not control it. Seeing that the Sky Splitter sword was attacking Shinjioli to the point that he could not fight back, Yi Tianli leaped up and floated 30 feet forward. He wanted to add more strength to the Sky Splitter sword to kill Shinjioli. And a sudden change happened at this moment. Shinjioli, who was originally suppressed by the Sky Splitter sword and had no power to fight back, flashed like lightning. He directly bypassed the attack of the Sky Splitter sword and slashed at Yi Tianli's wrist with his black iron sword. No one could describe how fast Shinjuli's movements were at this moment, and no one could describe how amazing his sword was. By the time Yi Tianli reacted, his opponent's sword had already pierced his wrist meridian. Yi Tianli's wrist shook violently, and his telekinesis was instantly sealed. He could not move as if his acupoints were sealed. At the same time, the Sky Splitter sword turned around and attacked Shinjuli from behind. With a soft sound, the Sky Splitter sword pierced through Shinjuli's protective wizardry barrier. The sharp edge of the sword pierced through his clothes and blood oozed out from the wound. It was bright red like pearls. The sword trembled slightly, as if it wanted to stab in, but it did not have the strength to continue. Suddenly, with a buzzing sound, it flew down and disappeared into Amo's sleeve. Shinjuli did not care about the Sky Splitter sword behind him. He pointed the tip of the sword at Yi Tianli's forehead. "You lost." With just 3 words, he announced the result. No one had any objections to this result. Naturally, the higher-ups of the 6 realms who were watching the battle below did not have any objections. This round ended with Shinjuli's victory. Shinjuli stepped on the high platform again. His eyes fell on Amo, and there was a complicated look in his eyes. Amo looked at him with a smile. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were cold. She said 2 words, "Congratulations." "Thank you." Shinjuli also replied to her with 2 words. His eyes fell on the enchantment behind her, and his voice was as calm as water. "Can you let him out now?" Amo tilted his head and looked at him. "Is he really your son?" Shinjuli looked at her and said, "He's also your son." "Yes, that's right. He's also my son." Amo smiled. "I personally delivered him." She waved her hand, and the layer of pink wizardry barrier disappeared, revealing Shin Nianmo inside. "Little brat, since you are quite obedient, I will let you go." She suddenly paused. Shin Nianmo sat there. His big eyes were already red and swollen. He looked at her with a strange and distant gaze. It was as if he was no longer the child who had reached out his hands and desperately wanted to be held by her, desperately burrowing into her arms. After he appeared, he slowly stood up in the enchantment. His 2 small hands supported the edge of the enchantment as he looked at Shinjuli, who was standing not far away. "Father." He called out and then reached out his small hands. "Father, hug." Amo pursed her lips and glanced at the little one. "Little brat, do you want your father or your mother?" The little one looked at her, then looked at Shinjuli, and then looked at her again. His little face seemed to be in a dilemma. He murmured, "Nianmo wants both," then, he pursed his lips. "But mother doesn't want my father, and she still favors the outsider." "Nianmo. Nianmo wants my father." Amo did not speak. She just waved her hand again, and the enchantment that surrounded Shin Nianmo finally shattered. Chapter 1623. Shin Nianmo immediately rushed out and rushed directly to Shinjuli. "Father." The little one still had tears in his eyes, but he stubbornly stopped crying. Like a small cannonball, he rushed directly into Shinjuli's arms. Shinjuli carried him and looked at the child's red and swollen eyes. His fingers clenched in his sleeves, and finally, he looked at Amo. Amo looked at him with a smile. "Shinjuli, do you still want to be engaged with me?" Shinjuli finally looked at her face again. They looked at each other for a moment and smiled. "Why not?" Amo was speechless. She smiled leisurely. "You should know that I don't have a good impression of you. Even if you win and I agree to this marriage according to the oath, I may not marry you." Shinjiuli gently pressed his palm on his son's eyelids and said faintly, "One step at a time." A faint white light appeared from his palm and hovered in front of his son's eyes. After a moment, he moved his hand away. Shin Nianma's red and swollen eyes finally disappeared, and his big eyes returned to normal. "Nianma, I remember you once said that when you were still in your mother's stomach, your mother taught you that a man should bleed and not cry. Have you forgotten it so quickly?" Shin Nianma pursed his lips and his face was a little red. He also felt that it was embarrassing to cry so miserably. "Father, I am wrong." He snuggled his big head on Shinjiuli's chest and rubbed it. "Father, I miss you." Shinjiuli raised his hand and rubbed his head. He nodded and did not say anything else. Since the little guy was born, it was the first time Shinjiuli carried him. Although he was only a few days old, his size was like a 1-year-old child. He was pink and soft like a little glutinous rice bun. When he was carried in his arms, he was heavy and chubby. A child's expression was very obvious, and Shin Nianma was no exception. When he was in the stone, he was very curious about how it felt to lie in his father's arms. Now, he finally had a taste of it. His father's embrace was like a mountain, giving him an extremely safe feeling. Just now, he was worried sick in the enchantment. Now that he was in his father's arms, he was finally relieved. He didn't hold back and kissed his father's face. Shinjiuli, his son, was too enthusiastic. Aomo watched the interaction between the father and son coldly from the side. It was a natural display of affection between father and son that could not be faked. Her eyes deepened slightly and she was in a trance for a moment, but then her eyes became clear again and she returned to her indifferent appearance. She smiled gently and said, "Since you don't want to back down, then let's have another 2 rounds." At this moment, Yi Tianli also landed on the ground. He looked a little down, but he was still an elegant gentleman. He cupped his hands towards Aomo. "Aomo, thank you for the sword." Aomo smiled lazily. "You're welcome. Let's prepare for the second round." Yi Tianli had already thought it through. Through the previous round of battle, Shinjiuli's psyche power was obviously unfathomable. His spells must be very powerful as well. If they were to compete in spells in the second round, he was afraid that he would still lose miserably. Therefore, in the second round, he proposed to compete in Guqin skills. His Guqin skills were famous in the 6 realms. He once attracted countless birds to dance. He was the famous Guqin master in the 6 realms. When he proposed this, Shinjiuli looked at him strangely. "Are you sure you want to compete in Guqin skills? This is just a casual skill. No matter how strong it is, it can't be considered as a strong skill." Chapter 1624. He felt that if they were to compete in zither skills, he would definitely win. When he proposed this, Shinjiuli looked at him strangely. "Are you sure you want to compete in zither skills? This skill is just a leisure skill. No matter how strong it is, it can't be considered a strong skill." Yi Tianli heard that he seemed to be rejecting the idea and thought that he was not good at it. He immediately said, "How can you be the husband of the Devil Lord by just fighting and killing? You also need to be good at both the pen and the sword. The Devil Lord also likes to listen to the zither. Only after marriage can the zither and zither be in harmony. According to what you said, the second round of the zither competition." "Yes, zither skills. After this round, you can choose the content of the third round." Yi Tianli expressed his generosity. Shinjiuli said faintly, "I don't need to choose anymore. 2 out of 3 rounds. After this round, Yi Tianli could only be eliminated. There was no need for a third round. Thus, the second round of the competition began. The audience was cheering. Venerable Ye's music was not always heard. Listening to his music was a pleasure. He was definitely at the level of a master. If this was in modern times, he would be the Prince of Piano, Richard Clayderman. There were also people who were secretly worried for Shinjioli and looked at him with pity. They only hoped that he would choose what he was best at in the third round and turn the tables, a zither table, a zither stool, and a man in a purple robe playing the zither. When the sound of the zither rang, the whole square quieted down. People closed their eyes and listened to the sound of nature. Their mood rose and fell with the sound of the zither. The sound of the zither reverberated through the heavens and the earth. Birds flew over one after another from afar. There were red, white, flowery, gray, blue, and a myriad of colors, circling around the square. When the zither was played halfway, there were already hundreds of birds in the sky. They danced in the air with the music. It was very beautiful. When the song ended, the birds were still circling in the sky. They could not bear to leave. Yi Tianli plucked the last note and floated up. He glanced at Shinjioli. Shinjioli was sitting on the side with Shin Nianma on his lap. One of his palms was pressed on Shin Nianma's back as if he was giving him a massage. His fingertips were glowing with a faint white light from time to time. Apparently, he was taking the opportunity to treat Shin Nianma's illness. After all, Shin Nianma had just had a high fever, so his body was still weak. Shinjioli noticed it when he carried him in his arms. This son of his was brought up by him, so naturally, he doted on him very much. He couldn't bear for him to suffer even a little bit, let alone allow him to be unhealthy. Therefore, he immediately treated him. His medical skills were undoubtedly the best. While Yi Tianli was playing the guqin, he had already made Shin Nianma sweat profusely. This process was obviously not very comfortable. The little guy frowned slightly, but he could still endure it by pursing his lips. After Yi Tianli finished playing, Shinjioli also finished massaging the child. After Shin Nianma was sweating, Shinjioli cast a cleaning spell on him to make him feel refreshed. After cleaning up, the little guy felt much more refreshed. All the illness had disappeared without a trace. "Father, it was so painful just now, but I didn't cry." Shin Nianma opened his big eyes to ask for credit. Shinjioli patted his head. "You are like a little man now." Shin Nianma was praised, so he was immediately in high spirits. His little chest also puffed out. He could not help but look at his mother again. His mother was sitting there with one hand on her cheek. She was looking at him thoughtfully. Chapter 1625. Shin Nianma chose his father out of anger. Now that he saw his mother again, he was still very fond of her. When the mother and daughter looked at each other, he quickly showed his mother a big smile. However, Amo was immune to his angelic smile. She casually looked away and did not look at the father and son anymore. Oh no! Was his mother angry with him? Shin Nianma was anxious and wronged. He pursed his lips and tried to reach out his little hand in the direction of his mother. He looked at her eagerly. He hoped that she would look at him again. As long as she showed any signs of wanting to hug him, he would immediately rush over. However, his mother did not look at him. She did not look at him again. She ignored his little hand. Shin Nianma slowly withdrew his little hand. What should he do? He wanted both his father and mother. He wanted them to be together. Shinjioli looked down slightly. How could he not see his son's disappointment? However, his gaze landed on Amo's face again. The moment he saw her, he had the urge to carry her away without a care for anything else. However, he could not. She had obviously forgotten about him, and he was the high and mighty devil master. If he forced her to be with him, it would only make her more disgusted. Perhaps they would never be able to go back. Therefore, he had to take it step by step. In the past, he always forced her to follow his footsteps and always let her stumble behind him. Now, he would follow her footsteps. She would be his. This would never change. After Yi Tianli finished his song, the audience applauded as usual. Yi Tianli smiled at Shinjiuli, who had just stood up. He could not hide his pride in his smile. You can start now. When I played, I attracted a total of 128 auspicious birds. As long as you can surpass this number, you will win. Shen Yanma pouted. Not all of them are auspicious birds. I saw 5 crows just now. Yi Tianli was speechless. He wanted to kick this little bastard out. Shinjiuli was too lazy to speak. When he could crush his opponent with his strength, anything he said would be superfluous. He raised his hand, and a guqin appeared on his lap. Shen Yanma stared at his father's guqin and then looked at Yi Tianli's guqin. He said loudly, "Father, is this an ordinary guqin? That's an immortal zither." His small eyes were very sharp. He could see that Yi Tianli's guqin was surrounded by immortal energy, while his father's guqin was an authentic one without any immortal energy. Shinjiuli hugged him with one arm and played the zither with the other. "It's okay. Father, put me down so that you can play the zither. I promise I won't run around." Shen Yanma wanted his father to win, so he did not want to burden him. He could already run on his own. No need, just be obedient. Shinjiuli didn't even raise his head. He stroked the strings of the zither with one hand, and a string of notes flowed out. Finally, he finished tuning. Yi Tianli was speechless. His face did not look good. He actually wanted to hold the child and play the zither. This was blatant contempt. The people below looked at each other and felt that Shinjiuli was too conceited. Playing the zither with one hand and competing with the guqin saint. Did he know that he could not win, so he found a good excuse when he lost. The Emperor Immortal stood up. "If you feel that no one is taking care of your son, I can send the second concubine to take care of him." "No need." Shinjiuli still said the same 2 words. He raised his fingers, and the notes flowed under his fingers. Chapter 1626. Yi Tianli sat on the side in a daze. He stared blankly at the sky where a phoenix was leading a flock of birds to dance to the music. Regardless of the number or species of birds, there were too many to count. Not counting the dancing birds, there were at least a few thousand birds perched on top of the surrounding buildings. Everyone was so fascinated by the music that they had forgotten what day it was. When the music ended, the entire square fell into an unprecedented silence. Everyone was still in shock. The birds were obviously not satisfied. They quietly stopped at the corners of the pavilions and eaves. Pairs of small eyes were wide open as they looked at Shinjiuli with anticipation. A moment later, there was a burst of thunderous applause. Countless pairs of eyes looked at Shinjiuli with admiration. Their eyes were like fans who saw their idol. In this round, Shinjiuli won by a landslide. There was no suspense at all. After all, Yi Tianli was a reverend in the celestial world. Since he agreed to the bet, he had to admit defeat. His face was pale as he saluted Shinjiuli. "You have won." Xiao Xian accepts defeat wholeheartedly. Then, he bowed deeply to Mo, I am sorry. He had failed to live up to her expectations. After he finished his sentence, he turned and disappeared. Shinjiuli looked at Mo and smiled. "Devil Master, can I be your betrothed now?" Mo rested her chin on her hand and looked at him. She smiled lazily. "I do want to find the strongest person to get engaged with. However, there is a prerequisite. The person must be unmarried, and you." Her eyes fell on Shen Nianma. You even have a child. Obviously, you do not meet my requirements. Before Shen Jiuli could speak, Shen Nianma quickly interrupted. Nianma was born from a stone. Mother, you personally delivered my birth, so you should still remember. As for father. Father picked me up by accident. I was picked up by him, so father is unmarried. Shen Jiuli was speechless. Everyone was speechless. Yi Tianli had already proven that Shen Nianma was born from a rock. Therefore, no one could refute his claim. Everyone looked at Shen Jiuli to see what he would say. Shen Jiuli hugged his son and only said a few words. I swear in the name of the heavenly Tao that I am unmarried. As for this child, he's mine, and also yours. He's ours. In this world, no one dared to lie under the name of the heavenly Tao. Once they lied, they would immediately be struck by lightning. The heavenly lightning would expose his lies, leaving him with nowhere to hide. Therefore, after Shen Jiuli said this, everyone looked at the clear sky and finally believed him. Shen Jiuli slowly walked over to Amo and extended his hand. Amo, can we get engaged now? Amo smiled and tilted his head to look at him. I still don't seem to have a good impression of you. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you if I'm not happy? I'm not afraid. Even if you kill me, I'm willing to do so. Although you look cold, you're good at saying sweet things. I'm not saying sweet things. I'm just telling the truth. Amo finally stood up and smiled lazily. Well, since you have proven that you are the strongest person in this world, then I'll get engaged with you. She put her hand in his palm. He didn't know if it was because she was a demon, but although her hands were still small and soft, they were cold, as if they didn't have the warmth of a human. Chapter 1627. Shen Jiuli's eyes darkened slightly. Looking at her smiling but emotionless eyes, he felt as if his heart had been stabbed again. He tightened his grip on her hand. His hand was hot, but his grip was unable to warm her fingertips. He held Nianma in one hand and held her hand with the other. These two were his most beloved people in his heart. They should be a family. No matter what, he and she were back together again. They were a family again. He would thoroughly investigate the main reason why she was so emotionless. He would let her, who used to be lively, cheerful, smart, and lovely, come back. Although the people below had different thoughts, no one could stop the situation from developing to this point. The ceremonial officer walked over hesitantly. Devil Master, should we prepare a new Yanhao cup? Shen Jiuli shook his head. No need. In fact, he had already prepared everything. Since he planned to snatch the marriage, he naturally prepared everything. Shen Nianma was afraid that he would delay his father's ceremony. He stretched out his little hand to Amo and revealed a big smile. Mother, hug. Amo glanced at him. Didn't your father hug you? I like to be hugged by mother. The smile on Shen Nianma's little face was bigger and sweeter. However, his pair of big eyes were full of fear and uncertainty. He was afraid that his mother would reject him again. Amo did not know why her heart ached. Before she could think of what to do, she had already taken the little guy and held him in her arms. Ever since she came to this world, she had always felt empty. However, since this little guy came to her side, her empty heart seemed to have been filled a little. Especially when she held his chubby little body, she actually felt a little satisfied. When the little guy chose to leave her, she actually felt disappointed and jealous. Of course, she did not show these feelings. She had been very indifferent. As for Shen Jiuli, she did not have any feelings for him. She even had an instinctive dislike for him. She did not want him to be her fiancé, so she wanted to help Yi Tianli. She did not expect that Yi Tianli and Shen Jiuli were so different. Even if she helped him, the result could not be changed. Forget it. Anyway, her current life was quite boring. Perhaps this person could bring her some joy. Shen Jiuli was still holding her hand, as if he was afraid that she would run away. Out of nowhere, he pulled out a white jade cup. The cup was extremely exquisite, engraved with a pattern of mandarin ducks playing in water. The carving was extremely lifelike, and every feather of the mandarin ducks was lifelike. Some of the people below were also knowledgeable. The moment they saw the cup, they all secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. That white jade was no ordinary white jade. It was the bone of a vicious beast from the netherworld Dead Sea. This kind of evil beast's spine was born with a piece of jade. Legend has it that if this kind of jade was used to carve a good cup, it would allow the male and female lead, who used this cup to worship the heavens and earth, to be together forever. However, this beast was an extremely ferocious beast. It could almost be called an ancient magical beast. It had boundless strength and boundless magical power. No one dared to provoke it. A single beast could destroy an entire army of the celestial realm. Moreover, these beasts liked to move around in groups, which made them even harder to capture. Even if it was Yi Tianli, he did not dare to provoke them. He did not expect this unknown Shen Jiuli to have obtained this kind of jade in advance. He even carved such an exquisite cup. Ah, Mo's gaze also fell on the cup. You came prepared. Chapter 1628. Shen Jiuli looked at her and said, "For you, I have always come prepared." This person was much more thick-skinned than Yi Tianli and seemed to be stronger than Yi Tianli. Mo tried to withdraw her hand. Take the rootless water. Usually, the ritual was performed with both hands. He could not do it with only one hand. The earlier the ritual was completed, the earlier she could rest. She was sleepy again. Shen Jiuli did not have the intention to let go of her hand. It will only be meaningful if we do it together. Mo was speechless. You can't do it, right? Then let the officiant do it. I won't help you with this. This is our own ritual. It will only be meaningful if we complete it ourselves. Come, hold the cup. I don't need your help. Just hold it. Shen Jiuli put the thin handle in her hand and let her hold it. Then, he held her hand from the outside. His big hand wrapped around her small hand. Both of their hands were held together. It looked very harmonious. Shen Yanma reached out his little hand. Father, Mother, can I hold your hand as well? Mother, hold my hand. Father, hold my mother's hand. Shen Jiuli did not care about the boy's request. This was their engagement ceremony, not a family ceremony. Why would this boy want to join in the fun? He was also afraid that a long delay might lead to trouble. Ning Xuema had turned into Mo, and her temperament had become unpredictable, making it hard for people to grasp. If by any chance she became impatient, then the engagement ceremony would definitely be unable to proceed. Therefore, he immediately performed the ritual. He did not do a lot of complicated spells like Yi Tianli. He only pinched a spell with his fingers and pointed to the sky. The rain clouds in the sky instantly condensed and formed a small area above Shen Jiuli's head. A moment later, raindrops the size of a copper coin formed a straight line in the sky and directly poured into the white jade cup. With the addition of the rootless water, the mandarin ducks carved on the cup seemed to come alive. Under the sunlight, they seemed to swim in the water. In the blink of an eye, the cup was filled. It was just the right amount. Not a drop more, not a drop less. The rain and clouds in the sky had also dispersed, and not a single extra drop of water was left behind. The feelings of the spectators below could only be expressed with one word: holy shit. Indeed, comparing oneself to others would only make one angry. Shinjioli, who had appeared out of nowhere, was a freak of nature. No matter how dignified the female immortals were, they couldn't help but cheer. This included the two arrogant concubines of the Celestial Emperor. Their hands were almost swollen. When the wine in the cup containing Shinjioli and Aamo's blood beads turned into rain and fell from the sky, the entire square resounded with thunderous applause. The engagement ceremony was finally completed. Aamo yawned. "All right, from now on, you're my fiancé. I'm tired, so please take care of the guests. I'm going to rest." She turned to leave. Shinjioli pulled her back with a little force. "Wait, there's still a ceremony that hasn't been completed." Aamo raised her eyebrows. "What ceremony?" Shinjioli stared at her. Those deep blue eyes seemed to be rolling with waves. He smiled slightly and said in a low but clear voice, "Where we come from, we still have to kiss each other before we get engaged." He spoke very quickly. Before she could react, he took the opportunity to pull her into his arms and lowered his head to kiss her lips. It was soft and tender, like crystal tofu. There was even a very light milky fragrance. Chapter 1629. Shinjioli suddenly opened his eyes and saw Shin Yinma's beautiful big eyes right in front of him. It turned out that at the most critical moment, Aamo used Shin Yinma in his arms as a shield. Therefore, Shinjioli kissed his son's little mouth. Shinjioli was speechless. Shin Yinma still did not know that his first kiss had been taken away by his father. He only knew that he liked it when his parents kissed him. It made him feel pampered, so he generously kissed Shinjioli on the cheek as a return gift. Shinjioli was speechless. Just like that, the engagement ceremony came to a perfect end. Aamo did not like to socialize, so he left early with the child. Shinjioli had just become the fiancé of the Devil Master, so he could be considered as half the owner of the Mo Palace. On such an occasion, he should be smooth and slick in socializing. However, Shinjioli had always been used to doing things his own way. If he did not want to do something, no one could force him to do it. Moreover, no matter where he went, he was used to being the leader. This time, in order to make the engagement ceremony a complete success, he stayed to drink a few glasses of wine with the guests. If it were someone else, they would have to be humble on this day and go to every table to toast. However, Shinjioli did not do that. He just picked up a glass of wine on the high platform and swept his gaze across the crowd. Some of the noisy square quieted down. He had a kind of temperament, the temperament of a person who had been in the top position for a long time. This kind of temperament made the leaders of the 6 realms feel a kind of pressure. Although they were dissatisfied that he did not come down to toast, they could not say it out loud. Shinjioli stood on the stage and toasted a few glasses of wine. He did not say much, but every sentence was on the point. In short, there was only one meaning. He, Shinjioli, was now the Devil Lord's husband, so he would advance and retreat with her. They were husband and wife, and he would protect her at all costs. His words made the people of the immortal realm shed tears in their hearts. Immortals and demons were at odds with each other, and because the immortal realm didn't have enough backbone to oppose the demon realm, they succumbed to the demon master's despotic power. One super demon master was enough of a headache for them, and now she had a super awesome husband. Then how could the immortal world still have a chance to turn things around? Wouldn't that mean he would forever be under the devil's rule? As for the other realms, they were actually anxious in their hearts. The combination of Shinjioli and the Devil Lord was simply invincible. In the future, the people of the Devil Realm would most likely be able to do whatever they wanted. No one would dare to provoke them. They would truly be the dominant force. Of course, the people of the Devil World were still cheering thunderously. Each of them puffed out their chests and folded their bellies as they looked at the people of the other realms. It was still the Celestial Emperor who was unwilling to give up. He asked, "I heard that the heavenly Tao sword was once an ancient divine artifact, and it might even be the old artifact of that annihilated god. Now that it belongs to your Excellency, what is your Excellency's relationship with that annihilated god?" When this question was asked, the entire crowd fell silent. Although the crowd didn't know the specific story between the ancient gods and demons, they all knew that the gods and demons were at odds with each other at that time. In fact, a battle had almost destroyed the entire gods-demons continent. Now, the demon master had returned, but that ancient god hadn't. And Shinjioli had appeared so suddenly and subdued the heavenly Tao sword. Furthermore, there wasn't the slightest bit of demonic qi on his body, and there was even a faint auspicious light surrounding him. This meant that the cultivation technique he cultivated didn't belong to the devil realm. Based on all of the above, the crowd couldn't help but suspect his identity. Someone blurted out, "Your Excellency can't be. You can't be that ancient god, right?" Chapter 1630. Shinjioli's gaze fell upon the celestial arch. His gaze was as calm as still water, but the celestial arch felt as if he had been doused with cold water from head to toe. "I don't know who the god you're talking about is, but please remember that I'm Shinjioli, not anyone else. I won't be anyone else. The celestial arch, everyone else." The celestial arch originally wanted to recruit him to fight against the demonic realm. But now, he had to put that thought aside for the time being. As for the people from the other realms, they were secretly relieved. If that ancient god really did return, the gods and demons would not coexist. Just like how there were positive and negative poles in the sky, the two sides would fight sooner or later, and the demonic realm would suffer again. Two tigers could not live on one mountain, so it was enough for one world to only have one lord. Furthermore, this lord did not care much and did not have much ambition. The people of the 6 realms felt that this was good and did not want to change the situation. Thus, the engagement banquet came to a successful end. After this engagement banquet, Shinjioli's name instantly spread to every corner of the world. Almost everyone knew that he was the fiancé of the current demon lord. His spells and sword skills were unfathomable, and even his guqin skills were amazing. His playing of the guqin had once attracted a phoenix to dance and thousands of birds to circle around him. Furthermore, he was playing the guqin with one hand while holding a child in the other. No one could imagine what would happen if he focused on playing with both hands. Those who were present at that time were lucky enough to witness this scene. Countless people went back and talked about the battle between the most powerful beings. Those who talked about it were proud, and those who listened were moved. Especially the young girls who were present, they became the envy of all the young girls in the 6 realms because they witnessed it with their own eyes. On this continent, Yi Tianli was originally the dream lover of all the young girls. Ever since the engagement banquet, Shinjioli's popularity had surpassed Yi Tianli's. He had replaced Yi Tianli's position and became the new idol. Many girls wanted to meet him by chance. They were lovesick because of him. Of course, Demon Lord Almo's cold and strange temperament and supreme status also attracted the hearts of countless young men. Some of the people present were good at painting, so they had already drawn her appearance. Somehow, it had spread throughout the continent. Originally, the Demon Lord in people's hearts was a ferocious monster with 3 heads and 6 arms. Unexpectedly, it was such a beautiful little girl. It was hard to imagine that such a delicate little girl had lived for tens of thousands of years. Everyone felt that their worldview had been refreshed. When a person's status is too high, people will only put him or her on the altar and worship him or her as the savior in their hearts, who can only be seen from afar and not played with. There were very few people who wanted to develop an equal relationship with the other party, and that would require universal condemnation. Therefore, when Shinjioli's position in the Tian Ci continent was too high, the women of that world felt that it was blasphemy to even think about him. The women who fell in love with him were either fairies, foxes, or even Ningxiuama, the transmigrator. Similarly, Amo's position in this world was also very high, so there were not many people who really wanted to be close to her, and wanted to marry her. Even when Yi Tianli was with her, he was a little afraid and trembling with fear. Chapter 1631. Even when Yi Tianli was with her, he was a little fearful. He was afraid that he would make her unhappy, so he did not dare to force her to do anything. Of course, the others did not dare to do anything either. He had always been regarded as the tallest person. Although he was cool and handsome, because he was held too high, he became lonely. There were only subordinates and passers-by who tried to curry favor with him. He did not even have a true friend. When he was really depressed, he could not even find a good friend to talk to. Therefore, after 3 years, Amo used to think that life was cool and domineering. Gradually, she became bored and found it difficult to pass the time. Therefore, she wanted to get engaged and find a partner. It was not for anything else but to have someone to talk to. Yi Tianli had been by her side for so long. She thought that she could get rid of her loneliness a little. In fact, she did not have much in common with Yi Tianli. She went out with him several times only because she was too bored. Yi Tianli was gentle and considerate to her and acted according to her mood. Therefore, after a long time, she still felt that her life was a little empty. She still could not find anything in this world that really interested her. Her life seemed to be glorious, but in fact, it was somewhat muddle-headed. However, this kind of life ended at the moment when she and Shinjiuli were engaged. She suddenly realized that her life had suddenly become busy. Ever since Shinjiuli had gotten engaged to her, he had openly moved into Mo Palace as her fiancé. There was only a wall between his palace and hers. He would report to her place at least once a day, and this time, it was especially long. He came in the morning and left at night. He stayed by her side the whole day. She was used to being alone in the past 3 years. Subconsciously, she did not trust anyone. Naturally, she did not want to meet with one person so frequently. Therefore, on the 3rd day, she began to negotiate with him seriously. However, he had his reasons. He said that Nianma was with her. The child was so young that he needed his father to take care of him. It sounded like an excuse. Therefore, Amo turned around and threw the little boy who had been pestering her to sleep to him so that he could take care of him all day long. However, the little boy hugged her leg and did not want to let go. He cried loudly and said that his mother could not abandon Nianma. Nianma wanted to be with his mother. Ever since she came to this world, she had maintained the appearance of a 13 or 14-year-old girl. Now that this little fellow was crying and calling her mother, she also felt drunk, but damn it, she didn't feel out of place. She could harden her heart to anyone, but not him. Whenever the little fellow cried or laughed, it would inexplicably tug at her heart. The child seemed to lack motherly love and stayed in her arms every day. Especially when he slept at night, he had to hug her arm to sleep. After he pulled it out, he would close his eyes and search for it in a daze. His 2 little hands would scratch around until he grabbed her arm and hugged it in his arms. She didn't know what a normal child was like, but she felt that this little ancestor was extraordinarily clingy, even more clingy than a dog's skin plaster. If the child couldn't be pushed out, the father naturally couldn't be pushed out either. She didn't know who Shinjiuli had learned how to pick up girls from. Every day when he arrived in the morning fog, he would give her a bouquet of flowers. Those flowers were exotic species that she had never seen before. They were quiet and fragrant. Not only were they beautiful, but they also had a refreshing effect. However, Amo did not keep any of those flowers. The moment he sent them to her, she would throw them out in front of him. Chapter 1632. After the flowers were thrown out, they would wither at his feet. Although he did not show anything on his face, there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes from time to time. He would clean up the flowers and the scattered petals. Then, he would send a different flower the next day. Somehow, Amo felt happy when she saw the disappointment in his eyes. Therefore, she seemed to have finally found a little fun and did not get tired of it. Later, every time he sent flowers, she would not only throw them out but also wipe away the fragrance of the flowers. No matter what kind of flowers it was the same. Even if she liked some of the flowers, she would throw them out without hesitation because they were sent by him. Throwing the flowers had become an instinct and a pleasure. After persisting for a month, he finally stopped sending flowers. Amo subconsciously waited for him for the whole morning, but he did not come. She was a little puzzled, but she did not show it. Recently, little Nyenma was very curious and always pestered her to teach him this and that. His little mouth was very sweet, and he could not stop talking about his mother. In the past month, he was much closer to her. He let her hug him, praise him, and play with him. Little Nyenma began to find it funny that his mother did not accept the flowers sent by his father. Later, he was a little embarrassed for his father. Later, he even gave his father an idea. He said that his mother probably hated flowers, so he advised him not to send flowers. However, his father was very stubborn in this aspect. He gave and gave and gave. He was undaunted. Every time little Nyenma saw his father come in with a bouquet of flowers, he felt a little embarrassed for him. Subconsciously, he did not look at him. After his mother threw the bouquet of flowers out, he climbed on his father's knee as if nothing had happened. He played with him and listened to him explain some spells and other things. His father was very knowledgeable. No matter how strange the questions little Nyenma asked, he could always answer them. Little Nyenma gained a lot of knowledge. Of course, he learned very quickly. In the short span of a month, even though he looked like a little bean, he was already able to use many spells that even immortals could not easily learn. Some things were most afraid of becoming a habit. Once it became a habit, it would be deeply ingrained. For example, when Shinjuli sent flowers, Amo threw them away happily, but it had become a habit. She was not used to him suddenly not sending flowers. Even little Nyenma was not used to it. He stretched his neck and waited for his father's arrival. They waited for almost half the morning, but Shinjuli never showed up. It was not good for a child to be cooped up in the house all the time. Amo would take little Nyenma out for a walk every day. Most of the time, they would go to the huge backyard of Mo Palace. Why didn't father come today? Little Nyenma repeated for the 8th time as he looked out of the window. Amo stood up and picked him up. Let's go for a walk. The sun was shining brightly outside, and the wind was warm. Shin Nyenma held his mother's arm tightly. Mother, I heard that the heavenly fire flower has bloomed. I want to go and see it. In the entire Mo Palace, the only place where the heavenly fire flower grew was in Shinjuli's courtyard next door. Mo knew what Shin Nyenma was thinking. The little guy missed his father and wanted to go there to see it. Mo smiled. She knew that there was a kind of pursuit in this world called playing hard to get. Chapter 1633. Perhaps this was what the Almighty wanted to do, but unfortunately, she did not fall for it. It didn't matter if he sent flowers or not, she wouldn't take it to heart. She patted Shin Nyenma's head and said, "Do you want to see the heavenly fire flowers? Let's go. Mother will take you somewhere else." Her magic power was now boundless. She simply pointed at an open space in the garden, and the heavenly fire flowers that originally grew in the courtyard emerged from the soil. In just a moment, there was a large patch of flowers. The red color looked very festive. Shin Yinma looked at the large patch of flowers and was speechless. After a long time, he finally said, "Mother, I heard that this flower was planted in his courtyard by father. It is so red. I didn't know that father likes this kind of red color." He stared at Amo with his big eyes and said, "It is as red as mother's clothes." Amo looked at the clusters of heavenly fire flowers. Each of them was slim and elegant. When the breeze blew, they looked like dancing beauties. These flowers were teleported by her. In other words, these flowers were still Shinjuli's flowers. She did not change them. She put Shin Yinma in front of the flowers and said, "Good boy. Don't you want to see them? Then, take a good look." Shin Yinma could only stand there and admire. His eyes were looking at the flowers, but he was still thinking of a way to trick his mother to go to his father's courtyard. He looked at them and suddenly shouted, "Mother, why are these flowers withered?" Amo looked at them and saw that the flowers had indeed begun to wither. The petals drooped as if they were not acclimatized to the environment. Some of the petals had already begun to wither. Amo frowned slightly. She had made the soil and water of this open space exactly the same as the courtyard. Why were these flowers dying? She did not know much about flowers and plants. After a while, she still could not figure out the reason. She was wondering if she should move these flowers back. Suddenly, a voice came from behind her. "What are you doing?" "Father." Shin Yinma cheered and rushed toward the voice. Amo also slowly turned around and looked at Shinjuli, who had appeared behind her. Her voice was indifferent. "Your son wants to see the heavenly fire flowers, so I made them for him to see." Shinjuli's face was slightly pale. "You can take him to my courtyard to see." This was the first time in a month that he had spoken to her in such a heavy tone. Amo tilted his head and smiled. "I'm too lazy to go." Shinjuli looked down at her and said, "My courtyard is only one door away from yours. I'm as uninterested in your courtyard as I am in you." Amo was still smiling, but his words were poisonous. Shinjuli's face turned even paler. He pursed his thin lips and didn't say anything more. Instead, he turned around to look at the heavenly sparks. In less than an hour, more than half of the heavenly fire flowers had withered, leaving only half of their stamens. His fingers landed on the heavenly fire flowers, and his fingertips curled up slightly. It was clear that he was going to use a teleportation technique to teleport these flowers to his own courtyard. A faint light flashed in Amo's eyes as he suddenly waved his sleeve. A faint red light was emitted from her sleeve and directly turned into a hurricane that swept past the heavenly fire flowers. Then, all the heavenly fire flowers fell to the ground as if they had been burned by a fire. They were charred black and could no longer be seen. "You!" Shinjuli turned around abruptly. He was obviously angry. The wind from his sleeves made Amo's fiery red robe flutter in the wind. Amo raised her head to look at him, a glint flashing through her beautiful eyes. She looked at him fearlessly. "What? Are you angry? Can't stand me anymore? If you can't stand it, you can choose to cancel the marriage." Chapter 1634. Shinjuli looked at her, and Amo looked back at him. Although she was short, her aura was strong, and there was a faint dark aura around her. Shinjuli slowly lowered his sleeves and said clearly, "No, I will not cancel the engagement." Amo's eyes flickered slightly, and she sneered, "Why? Are you reluctant to give up the position of the Devil Lord's husband?" Shinjuli's eyes were as calm as water. "I am just reluctant to give up the position of Amo's husband." He turned to look at the heavenly fire flowers as if he wanted to see if there was any hope to save them. Amo was speechless. She had an illusion that she had punched a pile of cotton. She was inexplicably anxious. No matter how she provoked this person, he did not lose his temper at her. He was so strong that she could not reject him. Unlike Yi Tianli would disappear for 2 days if she looked a little unwell. Shinjiuli searched the pile of withered flowers for a long time and finally found a fish that had escaped the net. He carefully held it up. Mo clenched her fists in her sleeves. She did not understand why he treasured such a flower. However, since he liked it, she wanted to destroy it. She wanted to provoke him so that he would take the initiative to cancel the engagement. That way, she would not be considered as breaking her promise. She raised her finger and threw a fireball. She wanted to burn the only surviving seedling in Shinjiuli's hand. Unexpectedly, Shinjiuli was prepared this time. The heavenly fire flower in his palm disappeared instantly. Mo's fireball hit him, and his body swayed slightly. However, he stood still as if nothing had happened. He looked at her and said, "You guys go ahead." He turned and disappeared. Mo lowered her sleeves and suddenly felt a little dispirited. She looked down and saw Shin Nianma looking at her with his round eyes. She touched his little head and asked, "Little boy, where do you want to go?" "Mother, please don't bully father, okay?" Shin Nianma pulled her dress. "Father is so pitiful. He is bleeding." Bleeding? Mo frowned slightly. She did not see him bleeding. Perhaps she just glanced at him. She didn't even see his face clearly. However, this person was too abominable. If he was seriously injured, with his martial arts, he would be able to heal him easily. Why did she have to bleed for the child to see? The trick of injuring oneself to gain the enemy's sympathy. Nianma was still young, so she did not want to explain too much to the child. She did not know why, but she did not want to expose the dark side of her to the child at such an early age. Therefore, she blinked her eyes and carried Shin Nianma in her arms. "He is injured. Shall we go and see him?" Shin Nianma's eyes lit up. This was the first time that his mother had mentioned visiting his father. He immediately hugged her neck, afraid that she would go back on her words. Okay, mother, let's go now." Just now, he saw that his father's face was very pale, and there seemed to be blood stains on his back. Hermitage. This was where Shinjiuli was currently living. The courtyard was very clean. There were mountain rocks and a flower bed in the courtyard. However, the flowers in the flower bed had disappeared, leaving only a bare land. Although this courtyard was close to Mo's palace, it was obviously for the servants. The house was relatively small, and the courtyard was not big. When Shinjiuli first moved in, Mo had purposely pointed out a courtyard like this to him. She admitted that she wanted to humiliate him so that he would back out of the engagement. Chapter 1635. She did not expect him to move in without hesitation. Originally, a gardener from the Devil clan lived in the courtyard. The gardener was not a clean person, so the house he lived in was a little dirty and messy. When Shinjiuli arrived, the gardener had just moved away. There was a suspicious smell of smelly feet in the house. Shinjiuli used the cleansing spell 7 or 8 times to clean the house. Of course, the furniture inside was also destroyed by him and replaced with new ones. Mo had never been here before. It was her first time here. The moment she came in, her vision blurred for a moment. She felt that the layout of this place was somewhat familiar. Even the wind chimes under the eaves gave her a sense of déjà vu. She paused for a moment. Shinjiuli was busy in the flower garden. He had just planted the only remaining heavenly fire flower. The flower's head was drooping, and she did not know if it could survive. His back was facing them, and she could clearly see that there was blood dripping out from his back. "Father, you are bleeding." Shin Yanma jumped down from her arms and ran toward Shinjuli. Shinjuli suddenly turned around. When he saw them, he subconsciously stepped back and covered the flower. Shin Yanma directly rushed into his arms. Father, why are you injured? Which bastard did this to you? Tell me, and I will avenge you. He leaned his head toward his back and reached out his little hand to touch it. Shinjuli pulled his little hand down and said casually, "It is just a superficial injury. It is not a big deal." When he looked up, he saw Amo leaning against the door and looking at him lazily. Both of them looked at each other. Amo smiled. It seems that you also have times when you are injured. You have lost a lot of blood. I think you may need to rest for a few days. Her words were both concerned and sarcastic. Shinjuli looked at her and did not speak. After all, Shin Yanma was still young. He thought that his mother finally began to care about his father. His little face suddenly showed a smile. Father, you see, mother also cares about you. The child's smile was too innocent and innocent. Amo paused. She originally wanted to mock Shinjuli a little more, but now she couldn't bring herself to do so. Little Nyenma was very sensible. He could feel the cold war between the adults. The child was caught in the middle, so he tried his best to make them reconcile. Shinjuli sighed and rubbed the child's head. Yes, father is very happy. Amo's gaze fell on the flowers behind him. Your Excellency treasures these flowers very much. Shinjuli subconsciously covered the flower again. His eyes darkened. Amo, don't ruin it again. I have a use for it. What is it used for? It was rare for Amo to be curious. This, you will know in the future. Shinjuli hesitated for a moment. Amo yawned. Forget it. Actually, I'm not interested in knowing. It's just a flower. It doesn't matter if I keep it in Mo Palace. Her eyes looked around the courtyard casually. Finally, her gaze fell on his hands. He had probably just finished planting the flowers, so there was still mud on his hands. It was rare to see him like this. In her eyes, he was always the kind of man who was dressed neatly with a tight collar. It was the first time she saw him so lively. She did not know why, but he had a trace of bleakness, which made her heart inexplicably tight. She did not like this feeling. She tilted her head and looked at him. Slowly, she walked over. Let me see your injury. Chapter 1636. This was the first time she spoke to him in such a caring tone since they reunited. Shinjuli took a step back. No need. Shin Yanma was anxious. He hugged his father's shoulder tightly. Father, let mother take a look at you. Let her take a look. Mother's medical skills are also very good. Why did his father not seize this opportunity to be close to his mother? He was so anxious. Shinjuli had been facing her, so she could not see the wound on his back. Amo laughed. Are you playing hard to get again? I have been fooled. Since you don't want me to take a look, I will not take a look. Shinjuli was relieved. He handed the child to her. Take him out to play. I will take care of the wound myself. Just as he spoke, his vision blurred, and the red figure was gone. His facial expression changed slightly. When he was about to turn around, a cold hand had already touched his back. His body was slightly stiff. His fingers were slightly raised as if he wanted to do something, but he did not do it. In the time it took for him to pause, she had already hit his acupuncture point. The clothes on his back were rudely torn apart, and he could feel the slight chill in the air. He smiled bitterly. He had forgotten that she was now the Devil Master. Her kung fu should be similar to his. Shen Yinma also wanted to take a look at his father's injury, so he wanted to break free from his father's hand. However, his father held his little body tightly. He could not break free for a moment. He could not help but shout, "Father, look at Nyenma. Look at Nyenma. Let go of Nyenma." Of course, Shinjuli would not let go. He was afraid that his son would see such a hideous wound. However, the little guy was struggling too hard. His acupuncture point was also hit, so he almost could not hold him. Ah Mo's eyes fell on his back. There was a penetrating wound. It should be a sword wound. At this moment, the flesh near the wound was showing signs of decay. She could even see the bones inside. The wound was terrible. It was extremely stimulating to one's senses. With a flick of Ah Mo's sleeve, Shinjuli's shirt automatically closed and covered the wound once more. Almost at the same time, Shinjuli's acupoints opened by themselves. He held the child who almost fell to the ground and dodged to the side. Ah Mo had already moved to stand in front of him. She didn't say anything else, but there was a flash of light in her palm, and a small green bottle appeared. "Your Excellency, you can't heal yourself. I can help you this once, but I have a condition." Shinjuli looked at her with a faint smile. "Break off the engagement with you." Ah Mo. How did he get it right? "Yes, as long as you agree to break off the engagement, your wound will be healed immediately." Ah Mo felt that her condition was very timely. She already knew that the wound on his back was the credit of her sky splitter. If the person who was injured by the sword did not get the special antidote, the wound would not be healed even if it did not hurt the vital parts. Instead, it would rot inch by inch. Not only would it corrode the body, but it would also corrode the soul. As long as the person was not dead, the body and soul would suffer in pain until the body and soul disappeared. At that time, she knew that Shinjuli was injured by her sword, but he had been fine. She thought that his medical skills had finally broken through the sky and could heal the wound of the sky splitter. She did not expect that. It seemed that when he was with her, he would not be able to heal her. Chapter 1637. It seemed that when he was with her, he used a spell to cover up the wound. Somehow, it was exposed this time. Perhaps this sword wound had finally corroded his strong soul and weakened it, so he could no longer hide it. This morning, he did not send her flowers again. This was the right time to ask for a condition. After a month of pain, he should have tasted the pain of his soul and body. Therefore, he should agree to cancel the engagement. When this person was in front of her, she always felt more and more impatient. She did not like this feeling very much. Ah Mo looked at him with her bright eyes, hoping to get the word agree from his mouth. Unexpectedly, Shinjuli only looked at her and answered faintly, "No need." He turned and went into the house. Ah Mo was speechless. She was so angry that she clenched her fists in her sleeves and suddenly sneered. Well, he was asking for it. It was not that she did not want to save him. When she looked down, she saw Shin Yinma standing by her feet and looking at her eagerly. When he saw her looking at him, he pursed his lips. "Mother, is the wound on father's back serious? Can you not ask for a condition to treat him? He has lost so much blood. It must be very painful." Ah Mo was speechless. The little guy's eyes were too innocent, and there was a clear desire in them. This desire made Ah Mo feel as if her heart was being pricked. She carried the child and said faintly, "It's okay. Since he doesn't want mother to treat him, he must have his own way. I don't want to force him. Let's go. Mother will take you somewhere else to play." As she spoke, she strode out of the house. She did not want to stay in this house for a minute longer. Shinjioli sat on the bed and lowered his eyes to practice. Of course, he knew the reason for his injury. He had to admit that the Sky Splitter sword was indeed an ancient great demonic instrument. Its function was simply unbelievable. If an ordinary immortal was hit by such a sword, his flesh would definitely be destroyed within 3 days, and his soul would be scattered. Shinjioli's physique had always been different from ordinary people. It was also not comparable to the celestial powers. He would not be easily injured. Even if he was injured, he could quickly heal. In addition to his superb martial arts and medical skills, there was no injury that could stop him. However, he did not expect to kick an iron plate under the Sky Splitter sword. In the past month, he had searched for all kinds of treatment methods, but all he could do was slow down the progression of the injury. He could not heal it quickly. He naturally knew that she definitely had the antidote, but he didn't want to ask her for it. He also understood that after she found out about his injuries, she would definitely threaten him with the antidote, forcing him to cancel the engagement. She would never understand how important this engagement was to him. What was important was that he was willing to risk his life for it. Originally, he had already controlled his injuries, but because of the adventure last night, he had suffered a claw attack from a demonic beast, which aggravated his injuries. Thus, he temporarily did not have the strength to cover up the sword wound and let the child see it. After meditating for a moment, he opened his eyes and pulled up his sleeves, revealing the wound on his shoulder. This wound was caused by a demonic beast. Although it looked dangerous, it was still within the scope of his treatment. He applied the medicine himself and bandaged himself with one hand. The only thing that gave him a headache was the wound on his back. It seemed that all the medicine he used was soil and stone. His gaze fell on the lonely heavenly fire flower outside the window. He sighed softly. He did not know if this flower could come back to life. He could not help but ponder for a moment. Chapter 1638. As he was pondering, he suddenly sensed something and asked in a low voice, "Who's outside?" Someone had entered his courtyard. He put on his clothes and stood up. A delicate voice came from outside, "Master, I'm Xiangzhao. I've been ordered to serve you." "No need, get out." He loved cleanliness. Other than those two people, he didn't want anyone else to step foot in here. "Young master, the Devil Lord said that since young master is a guest here, you must have someone to serve you." When he heard that young master was injured, the Devil Lord was even more worried, so he sent this servant to serve young master well. The owner of the voice had already walked to the door, however, that was all she could do. Because in the next moment, a hurricane suddenly swirled around her, directly sweeping her up and blowing her away. With a bang, she slammed into a tree outside the courtyard, causing her to feel dizzy and almost spit out a mouthful of blood. "Xiangzhao." She staggered and got up. She felt as if all the bones in her body had fallen apart. Every time she moved, they would make cracking sounds. This time, she didn't dare to act rashly. It turned out that this cold and delicate guest's kung fu was so shocking. He didn't even show himself, but he had already sent her flying. If she went to provoke him again, she wouldn't have come out in such a state. She could only go back and report to the Devil Lord. Shinjioli sat on the cloud bed. His thin lips were tightly pursed and there was anger in his eyes. His fingers slowly clenched. He felt as if there was blood boiling in his chest and he couldn't suppress it. Ever since he was injured, his self-control was slightly weaker than before. He was no longer as carefree as before. Now, he had an obsession, he had worries, he had fetters. Naturally, he also had anger when he was offended. She was really trying to challenge his limits. This damned sword wound on the sky regicide not only corroded the soul and body, it also had a poison that made people speechless. When it acted up, not only did it cause pain all over his body, it also stimulated the lust in his body. Originally, he had been suppressing it and was able to endure it as if nothing had happened. Now, he couldn't suppress it anymore. While he was enduring the pain, he also had to endure the burning desire. The sky regicide sword was hers. She definitely knew the characteristics of this sword wound and also knew how he would react. She just had to send a woman to serve him at this time. Did she really want to push him out that badly? She wanted to push him to another woman so badly. The piercing pain on his back came again. He closed his eyes and breathed heavily, silently adjusting his breathing. Amo was sitting in a pavilion in the back garden. She was slightly uneasy as she stared blankly at a cluster of flowers in the distance. The flowers were also red in color. They were canna flowers and were somewhat similar to the heavenly flame flower, but their effects were as different as heaven and earth. Canna was purely ornamental, while skyfire flower was a kind of miraculous medicine. Amo had studied the medicinal properties of this skyfire flower. It had a hallucinogenic effect, similar to poppy, but its medicinal properties were 100 times stronger than poppy. Ever since she knew that the sword wound on Shinjioli's back hadn't healed, she had been thinking about the effects of the heavenly fire flower. But after thinking for a long time, she still couldn't think of any use for his injury. The heavenly fire flower was not among the ingredients used to concoct the antidote to the heaven-destroying sword, so why did he treasure it so much? What was he going to do with it? Mother, mother. Shin Yanma climbed onto her lap and waved his little hand in front of her eyes. Amo came back to his senses and realized that he seemed to have been lost in thought for a long time. Chapter 1639. Amo came back to her senses and realized that she seemed to have been lost in thought for a long time. She pursed her lips. It seemed that she had been thinking about his problem, his injury, and his flowers ever since she came out of the small courtyard. She was not in a good state. In the past 3 years, it was the first time that she could think about someone for so long. Why did you stop catching butterflies? Just now, this kid had been catching butterflies. Every time he caught one, she did not know how many butterflies were killed by him. Mother, you will definitely save father, right? Amo was speechless. She had been sitting here for less than 2 hours, but this brat had already muttered this sentence 8 times. Whenever he remembered it, he would run over and shake her knee and repeat it again. And every time, he would change his tune. He would say that his father really loved his mother very much. He would say that his father was seriously injured but still picked flowers for his mother. He would also say that his father was such a good person and his mother could not bear to see him suffer. He had too many reasons. She almost suspected that even when this kid was catching butterflies, his little brain was thinking about how to persuade her. Some of these reasons were almost laughable, but when they came from his mouth, coupled with the way he looked at her, the lethality was not ordinary. It almost made her waver. Just like now, Shin Yanma thought of an even better one. Mother, as long as you heal father's injury, I will be very, very obedient. I will not cry anymore and will not bother you anymore. Amo could not help but sigh. She rubbed his head and said, Mother, didn't you send someone to take care of him? Don't worry, your father will not die. How could such a strong and powerful person die? But father is not willing to be taken care of. Shin Yanma wanted to say more, but a shadow flashed not far away. An enchanting woman came over and bowed at Amo's feet. Devil Master, I am useless. I did not complete the mission given by you. What do you mean? Amo looked at her messy hair and torn dress and asked. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Vanilla. Vanilla was a flirtatious demon. Her figure was extremely devilish, and her face was extremely seductive. Especially those misty eyes and fiery lips. She didn't need to speak. Just by standing there, she was a scene that made men go crazy. What's more, her every frown and smile had a kind of bone-deep charm. As long as a man saw her, almost all of them would fall under her skirt. Steward Himu had found the herb according to Aomo's request. Aomo had been quite satisfied with it when he saw it, so he had sent her over to take care of Shinjuli. However, he did not expect her to return in less than 10 minutes, and in such a sorry state. Vanilla lowered her head. Young master didn't see Vanilla at all. He slapped me out before I even entered the room. How embarrassing. It was the first time she had been so embarrassed. Aomo's eyes flashed and he waved his hand to dismiss her. Mother, look. Father doesn't need anyone to serve him. His injury must be very serious. Shin Yinma took the opportunity to persuade her again. Aomo stretched out a finger and pointed at his little mouth. Okay, you play by yourself. I am sleepy. Let's sleep for a while. She put Shin Yinma down and leaned against the pillar of the pavilion to take a nap. The sun shone on her body and left a shadow behind her. Gradually, she seemed to have fallen asleep. Her arms were lazily hanging down. Shin Yinma played on the grass for a while and then ran over. He stood there and looked up at his mother's sleeping face. Finally, his eyes fell on his mother's hanging sleeve. The green medicine bottle in the sleeve was faintly discernible. Chapter 1640. It was the medicine that could cure his father's injury. Shin Yinma could recognize the medicine. He moved closer and reached out his little hand to grab the medicine. The words that his father once told him rang in his mind. Yinma, you have to be a man in the future. There are some bad habits that you cannot have. One of the bad habits that his father listed was stealing. Was it considered stealing when he took the medicine from his mother's sleeve? Would his father not like it? Would his mother abandon him in a fit of anger? Shin Yinma was a little hesitant. He reached out his little hand and retracted it again. His mother's sleeves fluttered in the wind, gently patting his little face, causing his little heart to rise and fall and rise again. His mother was probably too tired from being entangled by him. He had been standing there for a long time, but she did not wake up. For the past few days, he had been sleeping with his mother. Moreover, he had to sleep in her embrace. His mother was not used to it at first. She would often push him away in her sleep. Occasionally, when he rolled out of her embrace, she would conveniently pull him back into her embrace to sleep. His mother's body seemed to be cold all the time, but every time she hugged him, her body would become warm. It made him feel very comfortable every time he nestled in her arms. When they slept together, he would occasionally turn over and talk in his sleep to wake his mother up. It was probably because his fever had left a psychological shadow in his mother's heart. Every time he turned over, every time he groaned, his mother would subconsciously touch his forehead. His mother looked cold and did not like to talk much, but she still loved him very much and raised him as her own son. He was her biological son. Otherwise, he would not simply call a woman his mother. He, Shin Yinma, was a very special person. At this moment, Shin Yinma's thoughts were a little scattered. He stared at his mother and did not know what to do. After all, this was his first time being a thief, so he could not bear to do it. After a moment of hesitation, his father's pale face and the blood on his back flashed in front of his eyes. No. Even if he had to be a thief, he had to save his father. Shin Yinma finally made up his mind. He rubbed his little hand on his little robe and slowly put his little hand into his mother's sleeve. He slowly held the medicine bottle and slowly retracted his hand. Very good, his mother didn't wake up from beginning to end. She slept peacefully, and her breathing was also so even. When Shin Yinma finally held the bottle tightly in his hand, his heart almost jumped out of his chest. He really stole it. After all, he was still a child, and this was his first time being a thief, so he couldn't help but feel nervous. He held his breath and slowly retreated step by step. As he was short, he accidentally tripped on a branch with his heel and made a cracking sound. Although he didn't trip, the sound of the branch breaking made his chest jump as if a rabbit had been thrown into it. He subconsciously looked at his mother. She was still sleeping while leaning against the railing. Her long eyelashes covered her face, and she looked as beautiful as a sleeping beauty. Shin Yinma broke out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, his mother did not wake up. This was great. It seemed like even the heavens wanted him to succeed in saving his father. Shin Yinma did not dare to dawdle anymore. He turned around and ran. Although he was small, he ran quickly. In the blink of an eye, he had run out of the garden. Amo slowly opened his eyes and looked at the little figure that was running away. He slowly sat up, and the corners of his lips curled into a smile. Chapter 1641. However, she seemed to have thought of something, and her smile froze on her face. If her son knew that she was using him, she wondered if he would cry. She rubbed her eyebrows as she had a headache. She was not immune to the boy's cries, so she was a little scared. No, she did not want to drag it on any longer. She did not want that person to affect her mood. She got up and walked out. That person was in the most pain, so he should take the antidote. As long as he took the antidote, he would agree to her conditions. Their engagement would be automatically cancelled, and she would be free again. Perhaps it was because he had used his telekinesis during the process of healing. Shinjuli's sword poison was unusually violent. He sat there, sweating profusely. His back was aching and itching, as if there were countless ants crawling in and out of it. It was a corrosive pain, 100 times more intense than normal pain. There was also an itch, a bone-deep itch. It made people want to tear off the skin there and throw it away to find the culprit behind the itch. Not only that, the blood in his body seemed to be boiling and converging into a stream of heat. It gathered somewhere in his lower abdomen, screaming for release. He did not move at all. He gritted his teeth and endured the pain. His clothes were soaked with sweat. Suddenly, there was a sound of hurried footsteps outside the courtyard. Someone had rushed into his small courtyard. He suddenly opened his eyes. Because of the pain, his eyes were slightly red. He looked like a handsome Azura. The severe pain and itch, as well as the indescribable desire, made him have an impulse to destroy it. At this moment, he wanted to kill anyone who intruded into his territory. He curled his fingers and was about to do something. Suddenly, he seemed to have heard something, and his face changed slightly. His fingers loosened. Bang! The door of his house was knocked open, and a small figure rushed in. Father! Shinjuli's fingers trembled. He subconsciously used a cleaning spell on himself to hide his embarrassment. He looked at the little guy who ran to the cloud bed. Nyenma, what are you doing here? He subconsciously looked outside, but he did not see emotion. Nyenma was panting as he ran. Without hesitation, he climbed onto Gu Shijo's bed. The cloud bed was taller than him, so he couldn't climb up for a while. Father, pull Nyenma up. Gu Shijo hurriedly reached out her hand. In the end, Shinjuli couldn't bear to see his son working so hard. He pulled him up and held him in his arms. Where's your mother? Mother. Mother is still in the garden. Father, look, what is this? Shin Yinma finally let go of the thing that he had been holding in his little hand. It was a small green medicine bottle, and the bottle was stained with the little guy's sweat. Shinjuli's eyes narrowed slightly. He naturally recognized this. The antidote. Nienma, where did you get this? Shinjioli did not take the thing from his son. It's my mother's. She asked me to send it to you. Shin Nienma did not dare to admit that he stole it. Tell me the truth. Shinjioli's voice turned cold. How could the little guy lie to him at such a young age? Shin Nienma did not dare to lie anymore. He lowered his head and said, Mother was asleep, and I took it from her sleeve. He wanted to escape from his father's arms again. Father, quickly use it. I will apply it on you. Shinjioli held him tightly and did not let go. He looked at the little boy's red face because of running too fast. His face was very unpleasant. Chapter 1642. The distance from the garden to his courtyard was not close. It was at least 3 to 4 miles. If it were a celestial being, it would be easy to reach. However, for Shin Nienma, who was only a month old, it was a very long distance. He had to run for a while with his short legs. Until now, the little guy was still panting. However, the little guy's eyes were sparkling. He held the bottle in his hand as if it was a treasure. Father, please use it quickly. You don't look well. Is it painful? He lifted his sleeve and tried to wipe the cold sweat on his father's forehead. Father, Shinjioli felt suffocated. He felt sorry for his son's thoughtfulness and also for the woman's thoughtlessness. He had lived for so many years. What had he not seen before? What had he not seen before? How could Amo's little trick escape his eyes? That person even wanted to use a child. He took a deep breath and took the bottle from the child. Nienma, how is your recitation of the article on the response of the Tao that I taught you? Shin Nienma's forehead was dripping with sweat. He had forgotten to recite it. He was only concerned about his father today. Shinjioli looked at his guilty little face and put him down on the bed. Good boy, go back to the study room and memorize it. You are not allowed to come out if you are not familiar with it. If you are not familiar with it, my injury will be more painful. The last sentence was obviously a threat to the little guy. Moreover, he was relieved to see his father take the bottle. He immediately agreed, turned around, and ran away. Even when he reached the door, he was still worried, so he said, Father, you must use that medicine. Go. Shinjioli waved at his son. Shin Nienma finally felt relieved and ran away. His little figure disappeared at the door. Shinjioli looked at the bottle in his hand. He opened the cork and smelled it. He was a medical expert, so he could naturally smell that it was indeed the antidote. He slowly put the cork back on and slowly looked up. Come out. I know you are here. There was a flash of red light in the room, and Amo appeared. She raised her eyebrows and looked at him. You can see it. Shinjioli raised his hand and threw the bottle to her. I'm not stupid. Amo had no choice but to take the medicine bottle in his hand and look at him from head to toe. His face was unusually pale. Although he tried his best to endure it, and his face was calm and collected, he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. It was obvious that his sword wound was still acting up. He used to be so powerful, but now, his face was pale and he was sweating profusely. He looked like a sickly beauty, as fragile as glass. Amo moved closer to him and tossed the bottle up and down in front of him. You're in a lot of pain, aren't you? In fact, as long as you use this medicine, you can immediately eliminate all the uncomfortable feelings. Why do you have to force yourself? You should know that without the antidote, your sword wounds will flare up more and more violently each time, and you will feel more and more uncomfortable. Nienma is worried about you, and I don't want the child to be worried about you. So, I let him steal the medicine and send it to you. Her voice was full of temptation, like Satan who was trying to lure Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Her eyes fell on his lower body again. He was sitting there, and there was a strange shape on his robe. She smiled. Why do you have to endure it? You just have to give up. Before she could finish her sentence, a hand suddenly reached in front of her and grabbed her collar. Chapter 1643. In the next moment, there was a blur in front of her eyes as her entire body flew up and fell into his arms. His movements were too fast, so fast that Amo didn't even have time to react. Or perhaps she didn't even think that he would do this. By the time she reacted, she was already in his warm embrace. She was shocked and angry as she raised both her arms and slapped his chest. He actually dared to take advantage of her. With her current martial arts, no one could take advantage of her. She had used all of her strength when she raised her palms. If Shinjuli was hit by her, she was afraid that he would immediately fly out of the courtyard. But she had clearly underestimated Shinjuli's martial arts. As soon as her palms moved, they were caught by him. Taking advantage of the momentum, he locked them above her head and then flipped her over to press her down. His body was burning hot, but her body was slightly cold. The cold and the hot intertwined like the positive and negative poles of a magnet, tightly entwined together. Amo simply couldn't believe what was happening in front of her. She was actually being restrained by him while he was still heavily injured. She subconsciously wanted to use her magic, but as soon as her body moved, she was firmly pressed down by him. There was an inexplicable power in his body that enveloped her entire body, making it impossible for her to use her magic. Her hands were being restrained, so she steeled her heart and wanted to raise her leg to kick, but her legs were also being restrained by him, so she couldn't use any strength. His hot body pressed down on her body, making her heart beat wildly. His arms were tightly wrapped around her and there was a faint red light in his eyes. Actually, there is another kind of antidote. He reached out his finger and pressed it against her soft lips. Shuama, do you want to know what the other kind of antidote is? Shuama, he no longer called her Amo, but Shuama. This name seemed to have been lost for a long time. When he called out this name, it seemed to have a burning pain, making Amo's eyes suddenly turn dark. Shinjuli, this lord is not. She subconsciously wanted to deny this name, as if this name was a scourge that wanted to drag her into the abyss. However, before she could finish her explanation, his lips had already pressed down on hers. His fiery lips invaded her slightly cold lips. She suddenly widened her eyes and fiercely wanted to bite him, but his kiss was very skillful. She couldn't bite him at all. Instead, his lips and tongue invaded her mouth even more fiercely. His kiss was filled with a kind of violence and passion that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if he wanted to swallow her whole, making her almost unable to breathe. When Shinjuli first kissed her like this, it was actually more of a punishment than anything else. But once he hugged this body that he had been longing for day and night, his longing overwhelmed him and drowned him. Coupled with the effects of the medicine from the sword wound, now that he had her under his body, his desire burned like a raging fire. In this world, the only thing he wanted was her. The only thing he longed for was her. After searching for her for so long, he had missed her in his dreams and soul for so long. He longed for her so much that his soul ached. The moment he saw her for the first time, he wanted to hold her tightly in his arms to relieve the pain of missing her. However, he knew that that wouldn't do. He wanted to respect her, and he wanted to use his charm to get her back. He wanted to take it step by step and truly move her before making love with her. For the past month, when he was with her, he had been controlling himself again and again. He controlled his desire to hug her and kiss her. God knows how hard it was to see the person he loved in front of him, but he couldn't hug or kiss her. He never thought that she would actually challenge his bottom line again and again. Chapter 1644. However, he did not expect that she would challenge his bottom line again and again. She was indifferent to him and helped another man to hurt him. She even threw away his flowers. Even if she destroyed the flowers that could save his life, he could still forgive her and understand her. He also felt that he deserved it. However, he did not expect that she would send him another woman at this time. He also did not expect that she would use the child to trick him. If he could not guess the truth and use the drug to dissolve the engagement, what would the child think of him in the future? Nianma was a sensitive child. He would be traumatized for the rest of his life because of this. He was seriously injured. Perhaps his psychokinesis was not as strong as hers, but he had thousands of years of memory, while she only had 3 years of memory. Even if she was the Devil Master, she was still a rookie in front of him. Before she could make a move, he had already predicted it in advance. With a few moves, he had pinned her down and made her unable to move. His kiss was hot and raging on her lips. Under the entanglement of their tongues, Amo could feel the hardness and heat of a certain part of his body. At this point, Amo finally realized the disparity in strength between him and himself. She thought that she was already invincible in this world, but she did not expect that once she met him, she would still be restrained. Once she angered him, she would still be trapped by him. He kissed her as a punishment. The soft and delicate body in his arms made his heart tremble as if it was scalded. Images of the intimate moments with her flashed in his mind, and this image made his body as hard as iron. She used to be his wife, his lover, and the woman he loved for 3 lifetimes. Now, she was his fiancée. She was right under him, and he desperately needed redemption. Shouldn't all of this happen naturally? He panted heavily and desperately tried to control himself. At this moment, his emotions and rationality were in a tug-of-war. The look in his eyes changed dramatically. Apparently, he was in a fierce battle. Rip! He tore the front of her clothes. Her chest was cold, and the endless spring was revealed in front of his eyes. Shuemo. His voice was gloomy and hoarse. It was as if this name was redemption, pain, and an indescribable sorrow. It caused Amo's heart to tremble as well. She could not push him away, so she could only accept it passively. This name also made her feel like crying. It was as if the owner of this name had once been a part of her life, a part of her memories. She closed her eyes slightly. Her eyelashes gradually moistened, and a drop of tear flowed down the corner of her eye. The teardrop finally woke up Shinjioli, who had almost fallen into oblivion. The moment he saw it, his body stiffened. He suddenly let go of his hand and rolled to the side. As soon as Amo regained his freedom, he almost instinctively jumped off the cloud bed. Her mind was buzzing. She stood there and looked at her messy clothes. She couldn't help but feel ashamed and angry. She raised her hand and a red light shot toward Shinjioli. "You're courting death." Shinjioli had hurt the wound on his back when he was rolling. He was in so much pain that he wanted to die. He was sweating profusely and his vision was turning black. When Amo's red light came, he didn't dodge at all. Or rather, he didn't want to dodge at all. Her palm landed solidly on his chest, and the crisp sound of bones breaking rang out. His body trembled, and that pair of eyes fell directly on her body. They were clearly deep blue eyes, but they were as black as an abyss. Chapter 1645. He did not say a word. He just looked at her and then slowly closed his eyes. After Amo hit him, she did not expect to hit him. She stood there in a daze. The way he looked at her made her heart sink. There seemed to be an inexplicable string in the depths of her heart. There was a suffocating pain in her heart. She wanted to turn around and leave after hitting him, but her feet seemed to be tied by something. She could not move for a while. Shinjuli, this is a lesson for taking advantage of me. Her voice was full of hatred. He did not move. Shinjuli, if it were not for Nyenma, I would have killed you immediately. He still did not move. Shinjuli, don't play dead. Let me tell you, it is useless to play dead. I will not fall for it. He closed his eyes and lay on the cloud bed without moving. There was blood at the corner of his lips. It was bright red. Who would be hurt by the sight? Ah, Mo's eyes darkened. She took a light breath and suddenly turned around to leave. She quickly walked out of the house where she almost lost her virginity. This person dared to take advantage of her. Even if she really killed him, he deserved it. He deserved to die. He deserved to die. He deserved to die. This sentence kept popping up in her mind, and her domineering aura leaked out. However, her footsteps were getting slower and slower. She did not know why, but when she thought of the words "he is dead," her heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. It was as if these words had hurt her and made her live a life worse than death. When she reached the door of the courtyard, she finally stopped. It was as if there was a lead ball tied to her feet. She could not move anymore. The wound on his back, the blood at the corner of his lips, and his eyes that were as deep as the abyss. She could not help but clench her fists tightly. If he really died here, just when she thought of this, she seemed to have noticed something. She looked up and narrowed her eyes slightly. Shin Nyenma's small body emerged from the other side of the road and was running in this direction. Although his two calves were short, he was not slow at all. He was probably using all his strength. He was indeed a smart child. He had finished the homework that his father had given him in such a short time. He had memorized the article on the response of the Tao by heart. He had come here to show off to his father and take a look at his father's injuries to see if he had recovered. Just as he ran to the door, a red figure suddenly blocked his way. He was shocked and couldn't stop in time, so he crashed into the arms of the red-clothed man. He shook his head and looked up in confusion. Then, he shrunk back. Mother. He felt a little guilty. Mo looked down at him, her face expressionless. Little brat, why are you running? Mother, Nyenma is here to see father. After he finished his sentence, he was a little surprised. Mother, why are you here? He suddenly thought of something and his eyes lit up. Mother, you're also worried about father, so you came to see him, right? You're willing to treat him. His eyes were full of pure joy. His little face smiled like a flower, which made Mo's heart ache again. She took a light breath and patted Nyenma's head. Well, I have to see your father and treat him. I can't disturb you. You go play in the garden first. I will find you later. Okay. Shin Nyenma did not suspect anything. He pulled Mo's sleeve again. Mother, you must treat father. Father will be very happy. Chapter 1646. Don't be long-winded. Go. Shin Nyenma was afraid that his mother would regret, so he turned and ran away. He ran faster than he came. Mo stood at the door of the courtyard and watched him run away. She was slightly relieved. Fortunately, the child did not see it. Forget it. For the sake of the child, she would save him this time. She would talk about breaking off the engagement later. She finally found a reason to save him. She turned and ran back. Shinjuli was still unconscious and did not move. Mo went forward to check his injuries. Her heart skipped a beat. Thanks to her palm strike, 4 of his ribs were broken, and one of them had almost pierced his heart. The sword wound on his back showed signs of enlargement. It looked even more ferocious. In addition to these two places, there were some scars on his body. There were claw marks, teeth wounds, burns. All kinds of injuries were stacked on his body. It was a frightening sight. Wasn't this person extremely powerful? How could he have so many injuries? She remembered that there were no scars on his body. His skin was flawless like jade. Her fingers that were checking on him suddenly paused. No, she did not want to remember him. She should not remember anything about him. She did not want to remember. A red light flashed in Almo's palm. She gently hit her forehead to erase all the memories that should not and did not want to appear. There were two injuries that made him unconscious. One was on his back, and the other was on his chest. It seemed that these two injuries had something to do with her. Amo pursed her lips. She tore open his robe and fixed the broken ribs on his chest. She was very skilled in the way she fixed the ribs. She was so familiar with it that even she was stunned. She knew that it must be a skill that she learned 3 years ago before she went through the ordeal. She was too lazy to think about it. She was the Devil Master. Although she did not have the memory of her previous life, she knew that she had lived for more than 10,000 years. She did not know how many things she had experienced in these 10,000 years. Her life before the ordeal was at most a few decades. Compared to her life of tens of thousands of years, a few decades was just a drop in the ocean. Why should she care about those decades? Why should she remember? What she wanted was the present. She lived for the present. She was the demon lord of the demonic immortal continent. As for everything else, they were nothing but fleeting clouds. The powerful surgeon's bone-setting technique, coupled with her special treatment method as the Devil Master, had healed his chest. She believed that when he woke up and used his self-healing method, he should be able to recover very quickly. As for the back, Amo looked at the hideous wound on his back and was slightly lost in thought. If she treated him now, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to find a way to force him to break off the engagement. This person was so strong and had an unusual obsession with her, which gave her an unusual headache. Needless to say, the Shuama he mentioned was the name of the person she had transformed into before she went through the calamity. That person might not be the real her, but her incarnation. She felt that when he called her Shuama, even though she was in his eyes, his heart was filled with that incarnation. It was like an actress who played the role of a heartthrob and made everyone fall head over heels for her. But that person was only infatuated with the character in the movie, not the real her. Nyenmo. Was little Nyenmo really the child she had when she was incarnated? But wasn't the child gone? Even though Amo had deliberately sealed that memory. Chapter 1647. Although Amo had deliberately sealed that memory, she still had a fragmentary impression of the loss of the child. It seemed that she had witnessed the moment of the miscarriage with her own eyes. This was the plot that she did not want to remember the most, but it was also the one that left the deepest impression on her. Even if she could not remember the specific situation, she subconsciously knew that the child was gone. Although she did not know what happened between the incarnation and Shinjioli, the only thing she was sure of was that the memory was extremely unpleasant. It was extremely tragic. It was so tragic that when she just woke up from her ordeal, she forcibly used the most powerful spell to seal the memory. It was not easy to use the spell, and she even had to pay a price. Since she had tried her best to erase the memory at that time, there was no need for her to remember it now. She would only torture herself. Nyenma, do you miss Shuama? Ha! Unfortunately, that person was gone. Shuama would no longer exist in this world. Therefore, whether it was his search or his repentance, it was destined to be in vain. Now, she would not be fooled by him and plunge into his gentle trap again. She gathered her messy emotions and thought for a moment. Since she had promised Nianma that she would heal him, she could not break her promise. She especially could not break her promise to a child. She was really afraid of Shen Nianma's disappointed eyes. "Shen Jiuli, you should thank God for giving you a good son," she murmured. Finally, she took out the antidote bottle and poured the antidote on his back. The unique antidote naturally had an immediate effect on the injury. After the medicine was applied, the injury no longer worsened. It even showed signs of recovery. After everything was done, she breathed a sigh of relief and got up. She did not want to stay for a moment longer and strode out. Not long after she walked out of the courtyard, she received a report from General Manager Himu. "Devil Master, we have just received a call for help from the Monster Kingdom. It said that a mysterious person has recently arrived in the Monster Kingdom and assassinated the Monster King. The Monster King's wife has asked for help from the Devil Kingdom. Would you like to go and have a look?" Mo frowned slightly. The Demon Realm and the Demon Realm were originally of the same breath and branch. That Demon King was still extremely respectful to her and was already considered her subordinate. Since he was killed, she naturally had to go and take a look. She wanted to see who the mysterious person was that he dared to behave so atrociously in her territory. When she was about to get up, she suddenly remembered that little Nianma was still waiting for her in the garden. She paused for a moment. On second thought, Shen Jiuli should be awake soon, and he would naturally take care of the child. Moreover, this was her Mo palace, which was heavily guarded. Even if there was no one to take care of little Nianma, nothing would happen to him. When she thought of this, she gave a few orders to head steward Himu and immediately flew out of Mo palace. Shen Jiuli was awakened by an intense itch. It was as if countless ants were desperately drilling into his flesh, causing him to break out in a cold sweat the moment he woke up. In his daze, he subconsciously wanted to scratch, but fortunately, his willpower was extremely strong. He woke up in time and controlled his hand. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the wound on his chest. It seemed that someone had treated it. Before he fainted, he naturally understood the situation of the wound on his chest. Now, he could feel that his wound had been healed, and the broken bones were neatly connected. Chapter 1648. His heart skipped a beat. He placed his hand on his chest and closed his eyes, as if he was sensing something. After a while, he opened his eyes and a light flashed across his eyes. It was her. She had taken care of it for him. It seemed like she still regretted her actions after slapping him, so she decided to treat him again. It seemed that she was not completely heartless towards him. Had he finally moved her a little? His heart was like a tidal wave. He took a light breath and could not help but look around. The room was very quiet. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on the window lattice. It was slightly red and warm. The itch on his back was getting worse. He could no longer ignore it. He gritted his teeth and conjured a water mirror. The water mirror reflected his entire back and the wound. Then he was stunned. The wound was showing signs of healing. It did not look so hideous anymore. Was this heart-piercing itch a sign that it was healing quickly? However, the itch was so bad that it did not feel like it was healing. His heart skipped a beat. He reached out and touched the wound. Then he took a sniff. There was a faint smell of the antidote. Did she use the antidote for him? She did not add any conditions. Shen Jiuli's eyes were already sparkling. He even forgot about the strange itch on his back. He slowly got up and smiled with his hand on his forehead. He had clearly just been beaten up, and it wasn't a light one at that, but it was as if a bright day had finally come. He stood up. After being tossed around for so long, his body was still a little weak. When he stood up, his body actually swayed a little. He held on to the corner of the table with one hand and waited for the sudden dizziness to pass. Fortunately, the dizziness came and went quickly. After the dizziness disappeared, he realized that the itch on his back seemed to have lessened. Although it was still itchy, it was tolerable. This was already much better than before. He really wanted to see her. He guessed that she would still not give him a good look. But so what? After all, he was one step closer to her, wasn't he? The one thing he did not lack in his life was patience. He had the patience to wait for her. Wait for her to really change her mind. When he returned to this world, he didn't want to be a god anymore. He just wanted to stay by her side and live a peaceful life. No matter if she was Shui Emo, Ning Shuemo, or the current Amo, the one he loved was always her. There had never been anyone else. He and she seemed to lack a bit of fate, and he couldn't predict the final outcome of the two of them. He didn't want to calculate anymore. He was a god, and no one in this world could really interfere with him. He believed that with his own strength, even if he had to fight, he would fight for fate. When she was Ning Shuemo and Shui Emo, she loved him. Even if she became Amo and lost all her memories, she would still fall in love with him again. Only then would this love of 3 lifetimes be complete. Shuemo, Amo. He chewed on the 2 names and a smile appeared on his lips. Recently, when this name flashed through his heart, it was often mixed with pain. At this moment, it also brought warmth. That warmth seemed to be ironed into his heart layer by layer. He closed his eyes and slightly adjusted his breathing. Perhaps it was because he had been tormented by that sword wound for too long. Now that he relaxed, he was especially tired. His body was extremely tired, but his mind was relaxed. Right now, she was probably in a state where she couldn't let go of her embarrassment and anger. It was better for him not to look for her, in case she felt embarrassed and said a few more unpleasant words to him. Chapter 1649. Gu Shizhou was probably in a state of anger and embarrassment. It was better for him not to look for her. He did not want her to embarrass herself and say something unpleasant to him. It was better for him to take a break and recover his energy. It would not be too late to see her the next day. Tomorrow. He should give her another kind of flower tomorrow. That kind of flower could only be found at night, and the guardian beast guarding the flower was particularly difficult to deal with. Therefore, he had to rest well. He fell into a deep sleep. Ever since he was injured by the Zhu Tian sword, he had not had a good night's sleep. Now, he could finally have a good night's sleep. He closed his eyes for a moment and went straight to hell. He originally planned to sleep for 2 hours, but he did not expect to have such a good sleep. When he woke up, it was already midnight. He hurriedly got up and walked out of the door. He looked at the stars outside and calculated the time. It was already early in the morning. After resting for a long time, he felt much better. The itchy feeling on his back had almost disappeared. If he did not pay attention, he would not be able to feel it. He looked at the flower in the courtyard again. It was indeed a very strong flower. In just half a day, it had already stretched out its branches and leaves. The slender and elegant flower swayed gently in the night wind, as if it was nodding to him in thanks. He breathed a sigh of relief and walked out of the courtyard. After thinking for a while, he waved his sleeve and covered the courtyard with a wizardry barrier. With this wizardry barrier, no one else could enter. Of course, the birds could not enter either. His precious flower, which he had painstakingly raised, would not be poisoned again. He stood outside Amo's bedroom. It was quiet, as usual. She must have fallen asleep with little Nianma in her arms. Speaking of which, he was a little envious of little Nyenma. He could lie in her arms and ask for comfort, hugs, and even received countless kisses from her. Unlike him, he could not control himself and kissed her once. He even got slapped by her. In fact, in the past month, he often did not sleep in the middle of the night like today. He stood in her courtyard for most of the night. Who was it that stood in the middle of the night? That was probably the true portrayal of him, right? Although he couldn't hold her or touch her during those days, as long as he thought of her resting with his son in the palace, he would feel a sense of security in his heart. It was no longer as empty and terrifying as it was when he was busy running around the heavenly gift continent a month ago. He looked at the sleeping quarters with a calm gaze. Starlight flickered in his eyes, outlining his white robe, making his figure look exceptionally tall and steady. Shuima, no matter what, I will never let you go again. Please don't push me away again, or at least push me gently. The mother and daughter always breathed very lightly when they slept, and she was used to setting up a boundary outside her bedroom, so even if he was outside her palace, he couldn't hear their breathing. It was the same this time. Her palace was quiet and there was no movement. He stood outside the palace for a moment before flying away. He had to hurry up and pluck the flowers, or it would be too late. The demon palace had always been known for its extravagance. However, no matter how luxurious the palace was, it was no longer as luxurious as it used to be. Blood and corpses were everywhere, indicating that there had just been a massacre. When Amo arrived outside the palace, this was the scene he saw. There were broken limbs and broken bodies everywhere, and blood was everywhere. The scene made Amo's pupils shrink slightly. Chapter 1650. Beside her, head steward Homu clicked his tongue. What a vicious method. What a professional way of killing. This was simply a one-sided suppression. Who could this mysterious person be? Amo didn't say anything. She vaguely sensed a familiar aura in the air, as if this mysterious person was an old acquaintance of hers. There was no one outside the hall, but there were voices inside. The hall's doors were wide open, like a giant beast choosing its prey. A murderous aura emanated from the hall, causing the air to feel heavy. Head steward Homu volunteered. Devil Lord, let me go in and take a look. No need. The corner of Amo's lips curled up into a nonchalant smile. With a leap, he openly flew into the main hall. Head steward Homu was speechless. The Devil Lord was domineering and mighty. There were indeed quite a number of people in the hall. It seemed that all the leaders of the demon race had gathered here, forming a dense mass. Several demon corpses were strewn about in the middle of the hall, including the demon king, who had been split into two and was curled up in his original form. Beside him were his wife, concubines, and children. None of them were left alive, as they were all dead. Of course, around them were the corpses of more than 10 demon generals. These were the demon king's loyal subordinates, who had sacrificed their last drop of blood to protect their master. As for the others, they were kneeling in the dust, bowing their heads to a man sitting on the main seat in the hall. The air was filled with the sweet smell of blood. The man sitting on the main seat was dressed in red, as if he had been dyed in blood. He had elegant features, and there was even a trace of a refined smile on his lips. He lazily looked at the people kneeling before him. Who is your king now? His voice was as magnetic as a cello, pleasant to the ear. Who would have thought that the owner of this voice was a demon who killed people like cutting grass? When he asked this question, the demon king was still alive and under the protection of the guards. Now that he asked this question again, if they answered incorrectly, they would naturally die like the demon king. The demon race had been in chaos these few years. Whoever had the hardest fist could become the demon king. In just 100 years, the demon king was like a crop of chives, cut and replaced. The current demon realm was just like the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. The demon kings changed frequently, even more frequently than women changed clothes. The demon king that had just died had only been in power for 5 years. It was normal for him to be PS'd by a newbie. Therefore, the leaders of the demon clan were very sensible. They immediately kowtowed and said, "Congratulations, Your Majesty, on becoming the demon king." It was rare for the shouts to be so uniform. The red-clothed man pursed his lips and smiled. Just as he was about to open his mouth to say something, he suddenly saw a woman flying in from outside the hall. It was as if he had been struck by lightning. He abruptly stood up and blurted out, "Momo." Mo's red robes danced in the wind as he floated in the air. He looked down at the red-clothed man with an indecipherable expression. "You recognize me?" The red-robed man was naturally Shuailan. He had succeeded in his tribulation, and when he woke up, he was already on this continent. The past was like smoke, passing through his mind. He finally remembered that he was once the strongest demon king in the world. He had once led the people of the demon realm to fight against the immortal realm, and killed the people of the immortal realm until they pissed their pants. If the immortal realm hadn't been defeated in the end and asked the supreme divinity to directly release his soul, perhaps he would have been able to expand the territory of the immortal realm for the demon realm. Chapter 1651. He sat at the place where he was reborn and felt like a lifetime had passed. He sat in the same place for 4 hours before he could sort out his thoughts. Supreme Divinity. Supreme Divinity. When he fought with the Supreme Divinity, he didn't even see her face. He didn't even hear her voice before she died under his sword. Now that he thought about it, he really couldn't accept it. The Supreme Divinity was the ruler of heaven and earth. She usually didn't meddle in other people's business. She didn't know why she attacked him that time. She really gave him face. After he was reborn, he naturally didn't want to be muddle-headed anymore. First, he tried every possible way to find out about the Supreme Divinity's whereabouts. Only then did he know that she had immortalized tens of thousands of years ago. Now, the ruler of this continent was a devil master called Mo. Shuailan naturally knew about this devil master. Tens of thousands of years ago, when he was still a little demon, he had heard of her name. In the 6 realms, no matter which realm it was, they all believed in a spiritual leader. For example, the human realm, immortal realm, and ghost realm believed in the Supreme Divinity. The demon realm, devil realm, and beast realm believed in the devil master. The Supreme Divinity was an ancient god, so the devil master was naturally an ancient devil. These two wouldn't appear once in a few hundred years. They couldn't be more mysterious. Although Shuailan had heard of the devil master, he had never seen her before. He only vaguely heard that she was a little girl who didn't grow up. Her name had the word Mo in it, but he didn't know anything else. Now that he was reborn and heard about this devil master, he had a strange feeling in his heart. He had a trace of suspicion about this devil master's identity. He really wanted to see this devil master, but the place where the devil master lived was not a place where he, who had no identity, could go. Besides, if the devil master was really the person he suspected, he also didn't want to see her without any status. Therefore, he thought about it and decided to enter the demon realm. The demon realm used to be his old territory. Although the demons here were no longer his subordinates and the demon realm had changed, he was still familiar with this place and the laws of the demon race. After his rebirth, not only did he regain his memories as the monster king, but he also regained his kung fu. If he wanted to regain his position as the monster king, he could only choose one path: kill. Just like the monkey king of a group of monkeys, if a new monkey wanted to replace the old monkey king, it would have to go through a bloody battle. Of course, the struggle for the throne of the demon race was much more complicated and troublesome than the struggle for the Monkey King. However, he couldn't stop himself from understanding the laws of the demon race. Whether it was sowing dissension or taking drastic measures to deal with the situation, he first used a series of methods in secret to make the original Demon King disloyal and disloyal. He also cultivated a group of followers for himself. When the time was right, he brought people in and caught the original Demon King off guard. Strength was the most important thing in the demon realm. As a Demon King, he naturally had some skills. According to the laws of the Yao clan, in order to take over the position of Yao King, one had to oust the original Yao King. Shui Lan naturally wanted to fight the Yao King alone. Unfortunately, Shui Lan's kung fu was too strong. The original Demon King wasn't his opponent at all and died under his sword. There was an unwritten rule in the demon realm. Once a new Demon King took over the position of Yao King, the first thing he had to do was to kill the original Demon King's family. To cut the grass, one had to remove the roots. This was also the law of the demon realm. Therefore, the original Demon King's family and the Demon King became ghosts under Shui Lan's sword. Shui Lan's kung fu and methods shocked all the generals of the demon race. The original Demon King's kung fu was so high that he couldn't even last 10 moves under his sword. Chapter 1652. Shui Lan's thunderous martial arts and methods shocked all the generals. The original Demon King's martial arts couldn't even last 10 moves under his sword. Naturally, these generals wouldn't be cannon fodder anymore. They immediately recognized Shui Lan as the new Demon King. Shui Lan originally wanted to visit the Demon Master in Mo Palace as the Demon King after inheriting the Demon King's position. He didn't expect her to come by herself. Moreover, this person was a miniature version of Ning Xuemo. However, the aura around her was many times darker than Ning Xuemo's. She really was Momo. His Momo really didn't die. However, from what she said, she didn't seem to remember him. She lost her memory. Shui Lan's eyes flashed with ecstasy. Losing her memory was good. Losing her memory was really good. As long as she lost her memory, she would forget everything about Shinjuli. She would be like a new person. As long as he worked hard, he might be able to get her again. Instead of standing behind her and watching helplessly as she worried about another man's well-being and loss, about life and death, until now, he still couldn't forget her dying breath under that tree. He also couldn't forget her relieved expression when she went through the lightning tribulation. She used to work so hard to live. She used to work so hard to live a wonderful life. At that moment, she really wanted to die. Now, heaven really treated him well. It actually allowed him to meet her again after going through the tribulation. It was a brand new her. In this world, no one would fight with him anymore. Shinjuli was still foolishly looking around the Tianxi continent. He didn't go through the tribulation, so he wouldn't come to this continent. He stood in place and raised his head to look at her. His gaze was gentle, and the smile on his lips was enchanting. He answered her question, "No, this is the first time we've met, respected Lord Devil Master." His tone was slightly raised, and his voice was magnetic and seductive, causing the demonesses in the hall to almost scream for him. Mo lowered her eyes to look at the man who was dressed in the same red robes as her. Dark waves swirled in her deep eyes as she spoke faintly, "No, you're lying." Shui Lan's heart sank. Did Momo recognize him? She didn't lose her memory. He didn't know if he should be happy or worried. Looking at her, he didn't know how to answer. It wasn't until now that he realized the difference between the Devil Master in front of him and the woman in his heart. She now had a pair of clear red eyes. Normally, demons would have a bit of red in their eyes, but that red was generally not pure. It could be black with red, or yellow with red. The more red there was, the higher the level of the demon, and the purer their skills. But Amo's eyes were pure red, without a trace of impurity. When it flowed slightly, it was as if there was a dark flame dancing in it. Shuilan had never seen such pure and beautiful red eyes. When she stared at him, her eyes were strangely deep, as if they could suck in his soul. Now, she was looking at Shuilan with such eyes. Looking at him, it was as if she wanted to look into the depths of his soul. Chapter 1653. Her tone was calm, but it gave people a soul-stirring feeling. It doesn't matter if you've known this lord before. Now that you've killed the king of the demon clan and become the new demon king, this lord will ask you, will you submit to this lord? She stood there. She was clearly short, but her powerful demonic aura made everyone tremble in fear. There were several hundred demons in the hall, but they were all suppressed by her aura. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Shuilan was also somewhat suffocated by the powerful demonic aura emitted from her body. His heart was indescribably anxious. At this moment, he suddenly realized the gap between him and her. Although he was a powerful demon king, compared to an ancient demon, there was clearly a world of difference. When she fully released her demon master aura, the pressure of an ancient demon master made his knees go weak. He almost wanted to bow down and worship. In her previous life or the life before that, although their statuses were different, the difference between them wasn't too great. Even when she was Ning Xuemo, he was still a little taller than her. He could restrain her and do whatever he wanted with her. But in this life, when he looked at her pair of extremely beautiful yet extremely deep eyes, he actually felt an instinctive sense of fear. She was the lord that the demon clan and the demon clan worshipped. She was high above. She was no longer the Momo that he thought was easy to approach. He was lost in thought for a moment. Amo didn't wait for his answer and became impatient. She slightly curled her fingers and her eyes became deeper. What? You don't want to submit? Her voice was almost cold. That powerful pressure caused all the demons in the hall to kneel down, trembling as they knelt there. Shuilan, he silently swallowed the blood in his throat and finally knelt down. Of course I submit, my demon master, Amo finally smiled. It was a smile of conquest, but it was also a smile that was expected. With this smile, the powerful demonic pressure finally disappeared. It was like a spring breeze swept through the hearts of the demons. She looked at Shuilan, her eyes filled with gentleness. Tell this lord your name. Shuilan. Shuilan replied in a deep voice. She smiled again and extended her small, snow-white hand towards him. Shuilan, right? Very well, now you have to do something for me. By the time Amo brought Shuilan back to Imo Palace, the sky was already starting to brighten. In the distance, the sky was showing the color of a duck's egg. The first rays of dawn had yet to fall, but the darkness was about to recede. Amo was in a good mood, and she believed that her mood would be even better tomorrow. She was most afraid of trouble and procrastination. She liked to do things in a straightforward manner. As long as she passed tomorrow, she believed that everything that was bothering her would end and she would return to the right path. Shuilan, who was beside her, had an indescribable expression on her face ever since she found out about her plan. It was hard to tell whether she was crying or laughing. Amo waved his hand at his loyal subordinate, head steward Himu. All right, you can go and prepare. Then, she looked at Shuilan and said in a gentle voice, you go and prepare too. Shuilan, manager Himu had always been obedient to her. After bowing to Amo, he left with Shuilan, who had an unfathomable expression on his face. Amo slowly returned to her own palace. The palace was as quiet as usual. She subconsciously looked at the bed. The bedding was neat and tidy, but there was no trace of Shin Yinmo. Chapter 1654. She closed her eyes slightly and walked out again. In the blink of an eye, she appeared in front of the door of the courtyard next door. There was a wizardry barrier in the courtyard. It was not difficult for her to break the barrier, but if she wanted to break the barrier, she would definitely disturb the two people in the courtyard who were having a good sleep. There was no need for that. She would just let him have a good sleep. Imo returned to her bedroom. She casually pulled the quilt over her body and closed her eyes slightly. She was not used to not having the warm and soft little thing by her side. When she was half asleep, she hugged a pillow in her arms as if she was still hugging the little guy. She closed her eyes. She had to get used to it. She was an unlucky person. It was better for the little guy to stay away from her. That man was Shin Yinmo's father. He would take good care of the little guy. The little guy was full of light aura. It was not suitable to stay by her side in the dark. She had been free for 3 years. She should not be tied down by anything. If he did not get close, he would not care. If he did not care, he would not be tied down. If he was not tied down, he would not be hurt. Recently, that person had messed up her mood from time to time. Now, it could finally end happily. That person seemed to be enduring the humiliation by her side, but in fact, he was extremely proud. When everything was revealed in front of him tomorrow, would he give up and leave? Would he? She closed her eyes slightly and thought of everything that would happen after dawn. She felt happy but also faintly twisted in her heart. The familiar lanterns and streamers were decorated, and the familiar red flowers were blooming everywhere. When Shinjioli returned to Mo Palace, he staggered slightly when he saw all the decorations in the side hall. He was not unfamiliar with such decorations. He had seen it thousands of times in his life. Mo Palace was holding a wedding. Naturally, he was not narcissistic enough to think that Mo would give him a surprise. She decorated the wedding hall to marry him. Moreover, the wedding hall did not conform to the standards of a real marriage for a real devil lord. It was more like a custom for a rich family to marry a concubine. He stopped in the air and looked down at everything with a pale face. His eyes were frighteningly deep. No one could guess what was on his mind at this time. General Manager Himu was the first to notice Shinjioli. He hurriedly flew over to greet him. Mr. Ever since Shinjioli moved in as the fiancé of the Devil Master, the Devil Clan had been addressing him as Mr. Shinjioli nodded slightly without saying anything. Manager Himu was also speechless. He thought that Shinjioli would angrily ask who was the organizer of the wedding. He thought that Shinjioli would ask him directly, but he didn't expect that Shinjioli would remain silent. This wasn't in line with the script they had rehearsed. Since he didn't ask, head steward Himu could only brace himself and answer, "Sir, the Devil Lord brought back an old friend yesterday. He fell in love with her at first sight and wants to take her as his concubine. Of course, if you don't mind, sir, after the Devil Lord marries that person today, he will have her serve you tea." Manager Himu said all this in one breath. Under Shinjioli's gaze, he felt a bit of pressure. In the devil realm, it was normal for a devil lord to have multiple wives and concubines. Some devil lords even had enormous harems. All the beautiful female devils of the demon race would have an affair with the devil lord and become his concubines. However, Aamo was a devil lord who was countless ranks higher than a devil lord. It should be normal for her to have multiple wives and concubines, right? Since she was a woman, her harem would naturally be filled with men. Chapter 1655. Manager Himu felt that it was normal for the Devil Master to take in a concubine, not to mention that this was just a show. Head steward Himu tried his best to make himself look calm and puff out his chest a little, so as to make this place seem more real. Manager Himu didn't dare to look directly at Shinjuli. This person's aura was too strong, making even a demon like him, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, feel anxious. He was waiting for Shinjuli to ask the name of that concubine so that he could say it openly. However, he didn't expect that Shinjuli would look down on him, giving Manager Himu the illusion that he was being looked down on by a god. His body couldn't help but stiffen. And Shinjuli's next words made him stiffen even more. Shinjuli only spat out 3 words. Shuailan. How did you know? Manager Himu blurted out. He was too shocked. The demon race could be said to have a network of information spread throughout the 6 realms. No matter what happened in any realm, the demon realm would always be the first to receive the news. He could only blame himself for Shuailan's plan to counterattack in the demon realm, this time being too meticulous. Before the coup was launched, no one had noticed, and no one had even known of his existence. Manager Himu had only learned the name Shuailan last night. How did this person know so quickly? This didn't make sense. Shinjuli didn't waste any more words with him. He only asked, "Where is she?" Manager Himu subconsciously replied, "In the main hall." Shinjuli's figure turned and disappeared. Manager Himu stood there with his mouth slightly agape, unable to react for a moment. Shinjuli's reaction was far beyond his expectations, so he didn't know whether he had succeeded or not. A moment after Shinjuli left, Manager Himu suddenly reacted. That's not right. This Mr. didn't fly out from the depths of Mo Palace, but flew in from outside. In other words, he didn't return last night. Mo Palace's main hall was decorated in a jubilant style. However, if one looked carefully, the main color here wasn't bright red, but more towards pink. Even Shuailan's robes leaned towards pink. Shuailan was extremely beautiful. At this moment, he didn't look frightening in his pink robes. Instead, it made his handsome face look rosy, giving him a different kind of beauty. Shuailan's to look like this. He moves to mention to say, "Mo, do you have to do it like this?" Mo was still wearing her red dress. She looked at him and asked coldly, "Are you going back on your word?" Shuailan felt a chill in his heart, and the smile on his face was somewhat stiff. I don't regret it. I just feel. God, why did it feel weird for him to wear such a pink robe and sit here? Tijuli Shuailan never thought that he would have a day like this. Last night, when Shuailan proposed this condition to him, being struck by lightning wasn't enough to describe his feelings. Although this concubine wasn't really a concubine and was just a show for others to see, as a supporting character, Shuailan still felt like his 3 views had been ruined. However, when the Devil Master's might pressed down on him, he had no choice but to agree. Moreover, the Devil Master had promised him very generous conditions. As long as he successfully cooperated with her to complete this show and achieve the effect she wanted, she would allocate a large piece of land to the demonic beasts. She even said that she would give him 2 extremely beautiful demonic girls after the deed was done. Chapter 1656. He wasn't interested in the witch, but he was very interested in the land that was going to belong to the demons. Among the 6 realms, the immortal realm had the largest and best territory, followed by the devil realm. Next were the human realm and the beast realm. The demons were at the bottom of the heap, with the most barren land, even poorer than the poorest part of Africa. The demons had no choice but to disguise themselves as humans and run to the human realm to make a living. However, once they were recognized by the human realm sorcerers, they would be chased down and beaten, and killed by the sorcerers. Being able to own their own fertile land was the demons' most urgent wish. Of course, tens of thousands of years ago, when Shui Lan was the demon king, things weren't like this. At that time, the demons were still very popular under his leadership, and they could almost do whatever they wanted in the 6 realms. Blame it on that reverend god. After killing him, the demon king, the demon race declined year after year. By the time Shui Lan took over, the demon race had already turned into mud that couldn't stick to the wall. Therefore, Mo's condition was simply a timely reign. Therefore, with all the above factors combined, Shui Lan gritted his teeth and agreed. The reborn Mo didn't say much, so Shui Lan didn't get much information from her. He only knew that she wanted him to act in front of someone, but she didn't say who that person was. She only wanted him to show off their affection at the appropriate time. She didn't say much else, so Shui Lan asked a few questions in a roundabout way, but he couldn't get anything out of her, so he simply stopped asking. Acting, he was good at it. He looked at Mo again, but saw that she was looking in a direction, slightly lost in thought. He didn't know what she was thinking, but there was a deathly stillness around her that made people not dare to talk to her. He looked at the lonely heaven character hanging in the middle of the wall and sighed softly. Even if he was taking in a concubine, this was too shabby. Just how perfunctory was Mo? There were a few dishes on the table, as well as a jug of wine and 2 wine glasses. The wine in the glasses was half warm. Mo and Shui Lan sat on either side of the table, each holding a glass of wine. Shui Lan expressed that he didn't quite understand the procedure of taking a concubine in the demon realm. Didn't taking a concubine need to bow to the heavens and earth? Taking a concubine only required one person to drink a cup of wine. Just as he was about to ask, the light at the door suddenly dimmed and a person slowly walked in. Shui Lan's mouth was a little dry from waiting. He picked up the glass of wine to moisten his throat, but the moment he saw the person clearly, the wine glass in his hand slipped and fell to the ground. Clang! An exceptionally clear and loud sound rang out. He couldn't care less about these things. He stood up abruptly and looked at the person who had just walked in. Shinjiuli. That person was naturally Shinjiuli. He stood at the door and looked at everything in the main hall. The sunlight inlaid a layer of silver on his back, but it made his face somewhat blurry. His gaze swept across the hall before finally landing on Mo. He didn't say anything and only looked at her calmly. It was as if a storm was gathering in the depths of his eyes, but his face was calm. Mo looked at him lazily. What are you doing here? She picked up the wine glass and twirled it around. There's no need to look at me like that. I'm just taking in a concubine. It's not a violation of our agreement. If you don't like it, there's no harm in. There's no harm in breaking off the engagement, is there? Shinjiuli continued. His voice was so steady that no fluctuations could be heard. Mo was choked by his straightforward reply and didn't say anything for a while. It was Shui Lan who reacted in time, a faint light flashing through his eyes. Chapter 1657. Shui Lan raised his hand to grab Mo's small hand and smiled at Shinjiuli. I didn't expect to meet you here. He didn't expect that the person Mo wanted him to put on an act for others to see was Shinjiuli. If he knew it was him, even if Mo didn't mention those conditions, he would have agreed. Shui Lan had suffered who knows how many times under Shinjiuli's hands. Now that he had this rare opportunity, he naturally wanted to abuse him. Mo is the devil master and I am the devil king. Devils and demons are one family. As long as this king can stay by Momo's side, it doesn't matter even if I'm a concubine. Shui Lan smiled flirtatiously and affectionately. He looked at Shinjiuli. Don't worry, this king won't steal your position as the first wife for Momo's sake. Of course, if you're tactful enough to withdraw from the marriage, then this king will fight for the position of the first wife. As he spoke, he pulled Amo in his direction. However, they were separated by a table, so he could only hold one hand. Shinjuli's gaze fell on their intertwined hands. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Amo's face. His voice was still calm. In order to withdraw from the marriage with me, you're willing to ruin yourself like this? Amo's expression changed slightly, but Shuailan was angry. He was a dignified devil king. Now that he was reduced to the devil master's concubine, he was the one who was ruined, all right. How could he say that Momo was ruined? He turned around and fluttered like a butterfly to Amo's side. He reached out to grab her slender waist and looked at Shinjuli provocatively. What do you mean ruined? Momo and I are in love with each other. If you didn't come between us, she and I would have been the most loving couple. Shinjuli, you're the one who made Momo so unhappy. If you know what's good for you, then withdraw from this marriage that doesn't belong to you and return to your immortal realm. Shinjuli's eyes fell on Shuailan's arm again. His voice was cold as he said, Shuailan, let her go if you don't want your arm to disappear. Shuailan's expression changed slightly. He knew that Shinjuli was a man of his words. He wasn't just threatening him, but if she let him go after hearing his threat, how shameful would that be? While Shinjuli hesitated, Amo lifted her hand and pushed his arm away. She looked up at him, her voice cold and decisive. Shinjuli, I really hate you. I don't want to see you. Therefore, it's better for you to cancel this marriage as soon as possible. Her words were very merciless. Shuailan stood to the side and felt a little embarrassed for Shinjuli. This supreme god had always been high and mighty. Who would have thought that there would be a day when he would be forced to cancel the marriage? Shuailan looked at Shinjuli's snow-white face. While he was happy, he also felt a little sad. What if I don't withdraw? Shinjuli said in a low voice. His calm appearance seemed to hide a storm. Then I'll find all kinds of ways, including all kinds of ways to make it real. Amo also threw caution to the wind. Since things had developed to this point, she could only continue regardless of everything. Since the knife had already been cut, she had to cut off all the tangled knots. The atmosphere in the hall was unusually heavy. It was so oppressive that it made people want to scream. Shinjuli's gaze focused on Amo's face. After pausing for a moment, he finally said word by word, "Okay, I'll cancel the marriage." She didn't expect him to agree so easily. Chapter 1658. She did not expect him to agree so readily. Amo's expression went blank for a moment. He paused for a moment before saying, okay. His voice was a little flat. When he said the last word, he finally raised his eyebrows a little and there was a hint of joy in his voice. After the successful engagement on the high platform, Shinjuli and Amo each had a light red thin line on their wrists. It was like the red line of the moon god. When Shinjuli said, "I will cancel the engagement," the thin line automatically broke and flashed in the air and disappeared. Once this thing disappeared, their engagement was automatically cancelled. From then on, he would no longer be her fiancé, and he would have nothing to do with her. Amo looked at her wrist quietly. It was as smooth as before, and there was no longer anything that made her feel like she was imprisoned. This was also the result she wanted for more than a month. Now that she had succeeded, she felt that it was unreal. He should be relieved, he should be happy, but what the hell was that indescribable pain in the depths of his heart? Shinjuli turned and walked away. Although he had suffered such a big blow, his steps were still very steady, but his speed was slightly faster. His back looked a little bleak and lonely. It was a little painful to look at. Mo paused and added, "You can take Nianma with you." After all, he was his biological son. The child would have a brighter future with him. Shinjioli paused for a moment, but he did not turn around. He only responded with a faint "okay" and added, "Where is he?" "I will take him with me." Mo's expression changed. "He is not with you." Shinjioli suddenly turned around and looked at her face. "Is he not with you?" Mo was speechless. Mo Palace was in a state of chaos like never before. Everyone was mobilized to search for a child, turning the sky upside down. No. 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 They had searched everywhere, even snake holes and rat nests, but they still couldn't find the little ancestor. It was as if the little fellow had disappeared from the face of the earth. No one knew where he was. Mo pursed her lips tightly. She used all kinds of spells to search, but to no avail. Her face was getting paler and paler, and her heart was beating faster and faster. Although the little guy was smart, he was still a child who had only been born for a little over a month. Who would take him if he got lost? Little Nianma's shadow flashed in her mind. His big eyes that longed for affection flashed by, and the last scene when she saw him flashed by. "All right, I'm going to see your father and treat him. I can't disturb him. Go play in the garden first. Mother will find you later." "Sure. Mother, you must cure father. Father will definitely be very happy. Don't be long-winded, go." Then he ran away. That little fellow had always hoped that his mother and father would love each other. Since he was young, he had been trying his best to bring them together. Every time he begged her to save his father, he would try to please her and be obedient. When he heard that she would save his father, he was so happy that his eyes were as bright as the stars. When he ran away, his footsteps were very happy. At that time, his little heart must have been jumping with joy. He must have been waiting for her in the garden yesterday, waiting for her good news. He must have been waiting for her to say that his father had been cured. Chapter 1659. He was an impatient child, so he must be waiting anxiously for her. Mo could almost see the way the child was eagerly waiting for her. Her heart felt like a pot of boiling water was boiling in her heart. She did not feel anything when the child was around, but now that he was missing, she knew that the world was falling apart. Her brain was buzzing, and her hands and feet were cold. All kinds of images of the child being kidnapped and abused flashed through her mind. She saw him begging on the street with broken arms and legs, having his organs dug out and sold, and being sold to remote mountains. She did not know where these images came from. The more she thought about it, the more panicked she became. She seemed to hear little Nianma crying for his parents. Her heart was in pain, as if it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. It was so tight that she could not breathe. "Nianma. Nianma. Nothing must happen to you." Her footsteps were getting more and more hurried. She went to the garden, the study room, and the bedroom. Gu Shizhou had checked every single place that little Nianma frequented, but she could not find any trace of him. People were like this. The more they could not find anything, the more they would want to search again and again. Although they knew that there was no result, they could not control their footsteps. She ran to the garden again. She had asked little Nianma to wait in the garden. The security of the Mo Palace was so tight, and little Nianma was harmless to anyone. How could he go missing? How could he go missing? She ran too fast and tripped on something. Suddenly, she staggered a few steps forward and directly fell into someone's arms. A faint fragrance like the Buddha lotus entered her nose. Mo's body stiffened, but the person had already held her and stepped back silently to keep a distance from her. Amo secretly took a breath and looked at the person who was checking something not far away. You. Did you find anything? Her voice was unconsciously trembling. No. Shinjioli only answered her with 2 words. His expression was very cold. It seemed that he treated her like a stranger after he broke off the engagement. Just now, when they were in a hurry to search, they met a few times, but he did not talk to her and just hurriedly passed by. Amo closed her eyes slightly and tried to calm herself down. She didn't say anything else and began to search the surroundings. Little Nyenma was very active, and his scent was everywhere in the garden. Therefore, it was impossible to find him with just his scent alone. She could only make inferences based on what she knew and everything around her. She asked little Nyenma to wait in the garden. Although the boy was naughty, he was a man of his words. Since he promised to wait here, he would wait in the garden. Even if she didn't get impatient, he could only run back to Shinjioli's courtyard to look for her and visit his father. According to the kid's patience, he could probably wait for 2 hours. Mo's gaze fell on Shinjioli. When did you leave Mo Palace? I didn't see him before I left Mo Palace. Midnight. I haven't, Shinjioli answered succinctly. Mo's heart sank. Shinjioli had left so late, yet that little fellow had not come to his courtyard to look for him. This meant that something had happened to him long ago. His disappearance was most likely in the garden, or on the way to Shinjioli's courtyard. Regardless of whether it was in the garden or on the way, it was a very safe place. Logically speaking, it was impossible for him to be lost. Could it be that an outsider had sneaked in and kidnapped him? Chapter 1660. The garden was a forbidden area in the Mo Palace, and only a limited number of people came here. Other than the children, only butler Himu, Yi Tianli, and Shinjioli had been here before. Therefore, the smell was not too complicated. Mo's sense of smell was not very sensitive, so she could only put her hope on Shinjioli, who was searching nearby. He was very careful and did not miss a single leaf or bush. Mo organized her thoughts and quickly told him what she knew. Shinjioli listened to her in silence. He only glanced at her. Although his eyes were calm, it was as cold as ice. It was as if he was condemning her. Since she had promised the child, why couldn't she see the child before she left? So that he did not have to wait. Mo felt a stab in her heart when he looked at her. She could not help but sneer. You are not qualified to condemn me. Don't worry about your son. If anything happens to him, you. At this point, her throat was blocked by a ball of cotton. She could not continue her sentence. If anything happened to little Nyenma, she did not know how to forgive herself. Perhaps, she would not be able to forgive herself for the rest of her life. She had long thought that little Nyenma should not be by her side. She would kill everyone she cared about. The more she cared about someone, the easier it was to lose them. It was not the first time that God had played her like this. She had wanted to push them away. She had pushed away everything that she cared about. Why did she have to bear the loss? Why? She did not know why, but the grievance in her heart was overwhelming. It made her nose sour and her throat tight. She stood in the same spot with her eyes lowered. Her fingers were cold, and suddenly her wrist tightened. Her small hand was held by someone. The big hand was warm and completely covered her cold little hand. Don't be afraid. Nyenma will be fine. The voice was as calm as usual. Mo suddenly raised her head and looked into a pair of deep blue eyes. The eyes were as calm as water, but there was a kind of power that could calm people's hearts. It silently comforted her heart, which was already extremely panicked. At this moment, she was like a hedgehog that would prick anyone she saw. She looked extremely sharp, but in fact, she was very afraid. She seemed to have experienced this feeling before, and it left a deep impression on her. She wished she could suppress it into the deepest recesses of her memory, never wanting to taste it again. But she didn't expect that she would experience it all over again. That feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, anxiety, and fear haunted her like a nightmare, making it hard for her to breathe. At this moment, she was no longer the high and mighty demon master, but a mother who had lost her child. She vaguely remembered how she felt when she had a miscarriage. She couldn't keep the thing she cared about the most. She could only watch it disappear. No one helped her. At that time, no one helped her. She prayed to all the gods and Buddhas, but no one extended a helping hand to her to save her child. Humans were like this. When they had once suffered a deep pain, both their body and heart would be extremely sensitive to this kind of pain. Once they suffered a similar kind of pain again, they would lose their minds. His behavior was far from his usual standard. Just like now, it was as if she had been sent into a nightmare that she could not wake up from. Her back was straight, but her little face was terrifyingly pale. She bit her lips so hard that she didn't even notice that the corner of her lips was bleeding. Her mind was blank, and she almost could not think. Her whole body was standing on the edge of a cliff, with one foot hanging in the air. It seemed that she would fall at any time. Suddenly, her body was pulled into a strong embrace, and a calm voice echoed in her ears, "Don't be afraid, Shuamo. Leave everything to me. I will find our child. Nienma will be fine." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.